Jurassic Park. The tropical rain fell in drenching sheets, hammering the corrugated roof of the clinic building. Roberta Carter sighed and stared out the window. From the clinic, she could hardly see the beach or the ocean beyond, cloaked in low fog. This wasn't what she expected when she had come to the fishing village of Bahia Nasco on the west coast of Costa Rica to spend 2 months as a visiting physician. She had been in Bahia Nasco now for 3 weeks, and it had rained every day. Everything else was fine. She liked the isolation of Bahia Nasco and the friendliness of its people. Costa Rica had one of the 20 best medical systems in the world, and even in this remote coastal village, the clinic was well maintained, amply supplied. But the rain, the constant, unending rain. Across the examining room, her well-trained paramedic Manuel cocked his head. "Listen," he said. And then she caught it. A sound blended with the rain, a deeper rumble that built and emerged until it was clear. The rhythmic thumping of a helicopter. She thought, they can't be flying in weather like this. But soon the helicopter burst low through the ocean fog, roared overhead, circled and came back. It was looking for a place to land. It was a big-bellied Sikorsky with a blue stripe on the side with the word InGen Construction. That was the name of the construction company building a new resort on one of the offshore islands. The resort was said to be spectacular and very complicated. Its construction had been going on for more than 2 years. Bobby wondered what was so urgent on that island that the helicopter would fly in this weather. Through the windshield, she saw the pilot exhale with relief as the helicopter settled onto the wet sand of the beach. Uniformed men jumped out and flung open the big side door. They were calling for a doctor. 2 black crewmen carried a limp body toward her, while a white man barked orders. Red hair appeared around the edges of his Mets baseball cap. "Is there a doctor here?" he called to her. "I'm Dr. Carter," she said. The red-haired man frowned at her. She was wearing cut-off jeans and a tank top. "Ed Regis. We've got a very sick man here, doctor." "Then you better take him to San Jose," she said. San Jose was the capital just 20 minutes away by air. "We would, but we can't get over the mountains in this weather. You have to treat him here." The injured man was a kid, no older than 18. Lifting away his blood-soaked shirt, Bobby saw a big slashing rip along his shoulder and another on the leg. What happened to him? Construction accident. He fell. One of the backhoes ran over him. The kid was pale, shivering, unconscious. The men brought the body through and set it on the table in the center of the room. Manuel started an intravenous line, and Bobby examined the boy's wounds. Immediately, she could see that it did not look good. The kid would almost certainly die. A big tearing laceration ran from his shoulder down his torso. At the edge of the wound, the flesh was shredded. At the center, the shoulder was dislocated, pale bones exposed. A second slash cut through the heavy muscles of the thigh, deep enough to reveal the pulse of the femoral artery below. Her first impression was that his leg had been ripped open. "Tell me again about this injury," she said. "I didn't see it," Ed said. "They say the backhoe dragged him." "Because it almost looks as if he was mauled," Bobby Carter said, probing the wound. "Mauled?" Ed said. No, it was a backhoe, believe me." He was edgy, acting as if he had done something wrong. Bobby wondered why. She bent lower and continued probing the wound. If an earth mover had rolled over him, dirt would be forced deep into the wound, but there wasn't any dirt, just a slippery, slimy foam. "How long ago did this happen?" "An hour." Again, she noticed how tense Ed Regis was. Bobby Carter turned back to the injuries. It really did look like a maul. On the other hand, most of the body was unmarked, which was unusual for an animal attack. She looked again at the head, the arms, the hands. She felt a chill. There were short slashing cuts on both palms and bruises on the wrists and forearms. It looked like bites, she thought. "All right," she said. "Wait outside." "Why?" Ed said, alarmed. "Do you want me to help him or not?" she said, and pushed him out the door and closed it on his face. She didn't know what was going on, but she didn't like it. She reached for her little Olympus point-and-shoot. She took several snapshots of the injury, shifting her light for a better view. Then the kid groaned, and she put her camera aside and bent toward him. His lips moved, his tongue thick. "Raptor," he said. "Lhasa raptor." At those words, Manuel froze, stepped back in horror. "What does it mean?" Bobby asked. Manuel shook his head. "I do not know, doctor. Lhasa raptor? No es español." No, it sounded to her like Spanish. Then please wash him. No, doctor. He wrinkled his nose. Bad smell. And he crossed himself. Bobby looked again at the slippery foam streaked across the wound. She touched it, rubbing it between her fingers. It was almost like saliva. The boy's lips moved. Raptor, he whispered. In a tone of horror, Manuel said, Raptor bit him. What's a raptor? Bobby asked. It means upia, Manuel said. She frowned. The Costa Ricans were not especially superstitious, but she had heard the upia mentioned in the village before. They were said to be night ghosts, faceless vampires who kidnapped small children. According to the belief, the upia had once lived in the mountains of Costa Rica, but now inhabited the islands offshore. Manuel was backing away, murmuring and crossing himself. It's not normal, he said. It is the upia. Bobby was about to order him back to work when the injured youth opened his eyes and sat straight up on the table. Manuel shrieked in terror. The injured boy moaned and twisted his head, looking left and right with wide, staring eyes, and then he explosively vomited blood. He went immediately into convulsions, his body vibrating, and Bobby grabbed for him, but he shuddered off the table onto the concrete floor. Ed opened the door, saying, "What the hell's happening?" When he saw the blood, he turned away, his hand to his mouth. Bobby was grabbing for a stick to put in the boy's clenched jaws, but even as she did it, she knew it was hopeless, and with a final spastic jerk, he relaxed and lay still. Manuel called for the men, who came back into the room and took the body away. Ed appeared, muttering, "I'm sure you did all you could." Then she watched as the men took the body away, back to the helicopter, and it lifted thunderously up into the sky. "It is better," Manuel said. Bobby was thinking about the boy's hands. They'd been covered with cuts and bruises in the characteristic pattern of defense wounds. She was quite sure he had not died of a construction accident. He had been attacked, and he had held up his hands against his attacker. "Where is this island they've come from?" she asked. "In the ocean, perhaps 120 miles offshore." "Pretty far for a resort," she said. Manuel watched the helicopter. "I hope they never come back." Well, she thought, at least she had pictures. But when she turned back to the table, she saw that her camera was gone. The rain finally stopped later that night. Alone in the bedroom behind the clinic, Bobby thumbed through her tattered paperback Spanish dictionary. The boy had said raptor, and despite Manuel's protests, she suspected it was a Spanish word. Sure enough, she found it in her dictionary. It meant ravisher or abductor. That gave her pause. The sense of the word was suspiciously close to the meaning of upia. Of course, she did not believe in the superstition, and no ghost had cut those hands. What had the boy been trying to tell her? From the next room, she heard groans. One of the village women was in the first stage of labor, and Elena Morales, the local midwife, was attending her. Bobby went into the clinic and gestured to Elena to step outside for a moment. "Elena? See, doctor? Do you know what is a raptor?" Elena was gray-haired and 60, a strong woman with a practical, no-nonsense air. "See," Elena nodded. "It means a person who comes in the night and takes away a child." "A kidnapper?" "Yes." "A upia?" Her whole manner changed. "Do not say this word, doctor." "Why not?" "Do not speak of upia now," Elena said firmly, nodding her head toward the groans of the laboring woman. "It is not wise to say this word now." "But does a raptor bite and cut his victims?" "Bite and cut?" Elena said, puzzled. "No, doctor, nothing like this. A raptor is a man who takes a new baby." She seemed irritated by the conversation and started back toward the clinic. "I will call to you when she is ready, doctor. I think 1 hour more, perhaps 2. Bobby went back to her room. Out of curiosity, she looked up raptor in the English side of her dictionary, and to her surprise, she found the word there, too. Raptor, a bird of prey. Mike Bowman whistled cheerfully as he drove the Land Rover through the Cabo Blanco Biological Reserve on the west coast of Costa Rica. It was a beautiful morning in July, and the road before him was spectacular, hugging the edge of a cliff, overlooking the jungle and the blue Pacific. Bowman, a 36-year-old real estate developer from Dallas, had come to Costa Rica with his wife Ellen and daughter Tina for a 2-week vacation. Seated beside him, Ellen said, Mike, are you sure this is the right road? We haven't seen any other people for hours. Darling, you wanted a deserted beach, he said, and that's what you're going to get. Ellen sighed. I hope you're right. Yeah, Dad, I hope you're right, said Tina from the back seat. She was 8 years old. Suddenly a small black shape flashed across the road, and Tina shrieked, Look! Look! Then it was gone, into the jungle. What was it, Ellen asked. A monkey? Maybe a squirrel monkey, Bowman said. Can I count it? Tina said, taking her pencil out. She was keeping a list of all the animals she had seen on her trip, as a project for school. I don't know, Mike said doubtfully. Tina consulted the pictures in the guidebook. I don't think it was a squirrel monkey, she said. According to this book, the beaches of Cabo Blanco are frequented by a variety of wildlife, including howler and white-faced monkeys, three-toed sloths, and coatimundi. You think we'll see a three-toed sloth, Dad? I bet we do. Really? Just look in the mirror. Very funny, Dad. Mike Bowman felt like a hero when they finally reached the beach. A 2-mile crescent of white sand, utterly deserted. He parked the Land Rover in the shade of the palm trees that fringed the area. Tina was already running down the beach. Don't forget you need your sunscreen, Ellen called. Later, Tina shouted, still running. I'm going to see if there's a sloth. Ellen Bowman looked around at the beach and the trees. You think she's all right? Honey, there's nobody here for miles, Mike said. What about snakes? Oh, for God's sake, Mike Bowman said. There are no snakes on a beach. Let her go. Let her have a good time. Tina ran until she was exhausted, and then she threw herself down on the sand and gleefully rolled to the water's edge. The ocean was warm, and there was hardly any surf at all. She sat for a while, catching her breath, and then she looked back toward her parents and the car to see how far she had come. Her mother waved, beckoning her to return. Tina waved back cheerfully, pretending she didn't understand. Tina wanted to stay right here and maybe see a sloth. Tina moved out of the sun, back from the water, to the shade of the palm trees. She sat down in the sand and noticed that three-toed tracks of birds were everywhere. She was idly looking at the tracks when she heard a chirping, followed by a rustling in the mangrove thicket behind her. She waited quietly, not moving, hearing the rustling again, and finally she saw the source of the sounds. A few yards away, a lizard emerged from the mangrove roots and peered at her. Tina held her breath. A new animal for her list. The lizard stood up on its hind legs, balancing on its thick tail, and stared at her. Standing like that, it was almost a foot tall, dark green with brown stripes along its back. Its tiny front legs ended in little lizard fingers that wiggled in the air. The lizard cocked its head as it looked at her. Tina thought it was cute, sort of like a big salamander. She raised her hand and wiggled her fingers back. The lizard wasn't frightened. It came toward her, walking upright on its hind legs. It was hardly bigger than a chicken, and like a chicken, it bobbed its head as it walked. She noticed that the lizard left three-toed tracks that looked exactly like bird tracks. The lizard came closer to Tina. Tina was amazed that it would come so close to her. Maybe it expected her to give it some food. Unfortunately, she didn't have any. Slowly, Tina extended her hand, palm open, to show she didn't have any food. The lizard paused, cocked his head, and chirped. Without warning, the lizard jumped up onto her outstretched hand. Tina could feel its little toes pinching the skin of her palm, and she felt the surprising weight of the animal's body pressing her arm down. And then the lizard scrambled up her arm toward her face. I just wish I could see her, Ellen Bowman said, squinting in the sunlight. I'm sure she's fine, Mike said, picking through the box lunch packed by the hotel. Then, from down the beach, carried by the wind, they heard their daughter's voice. She was screaming. She is quite comfortable now, Dr. Cruz said, lowering the plastic flap of the oxygen tent around Tina as she slept. Mike Bowman sat on a chair beside the bed, close to his daughter. Dr. Cruz radiated competence, and the Clinica Santa Maria, the modern hospital in Punta Arenas, was spotless. But even so, Mike Bowman felt nervous. There was no getting around the fact that his only daughter was desperately ill, and they were far from home. When Mike had first reached Tina, she was screaming hysterically. Her whole left arm was bloody, covered with a profusion of small bites, each the size of a thumbprint, and there were flecks of sticky foam on her arm, like a foamy saliva. He carried her back down the beach. Almost immediately her arm began to redden and swell. Mike would not soon forget the frantic drive back to civilization, the four-wheel drive Land Rover slipping and sliding up the muddy track into the hills, while his daughter screamed in fear and pain, and her arm grew more bloated and red. Long before they reached the park boundaries, the swelling had spread to her neck, and then Tina began to have trouble breathing. "She'll be all right now," Ellen said, staring through the plastic oxygen tent. "I believe so," Dr. Cruz said. "I have given her another dose of steroids, and her breathing is much easier. And you can see the swelling in her arm is greatly reduced." Mike Bowman said, "About those bites. We have no identification yet," the doctor said. "I myself haven't seen bites like that before, but you will notice they're disappearing. It's already quite difficult to make them out. Fortunately, I have taken photographs for reference, and I have washed her arm to collect some samples of the sticky saliva. One for analysis here, a second to send to the labs in San Jose, and the third we will keep frozen in case it is needed. Do you have the picture she made of the animal that bit her?" "Yes," Mike Bowman said. He handed the doctor the sketch that Tina had drawn, in response to questions from the admitting officials. "She said it was a green lizard, the size of a chicken or a crow." "I don't know of such a lizard," the doctor said. "She has drawn it standing on its hind legs." "That's right," Mike Bowman said. "She said the lizard walked on its hind legs." The doctor frowned. He stared at the picture a while longer. "I'm not an expert. I've asked for Dr. Gutierrez to visit us here. He is a senior researcher at the Reserva Biológica de Carrara, which is across the bay. Perhaps he can identify the animal for us. He should be here any minute." Dr. Gutierrez turned out to be a bearded man wearing khaki shorts and shirt. The surprise was that he was American, a field biologist from Yale who had worked in Costa Rica for the last 5 years. Marty Gutierrez examined Tina thoroughly, lifting her arm gently, peering closely at each of the bites with a penlight. He measured them with a small pocket ruler. He then inspected the Polaroids and asked several questions about the saliva, which Cruz told him was still being tested in the lab. Finally, he turned to Mike Bowman and his wife, waiting tensely. "I think Tina's going to be fine," he said. "I just want to be clear on a few details. Your daughter says she was bitten by a green lizard, approximately 1 foot high, which walked upright onto the beach from the mangrove swamp?" "That's right, yes." "And the lizard made some kind of a vocalization?" "Tina said it chirped or squeaked." "Well then," Dr. Gutierrez said, "I know this lizard." He explained that of the 6,000 species of lizard in the world, no more than a dozen species walked upright. Of those species, only 4 were found in Latin America, and judging by the coloration, the lizard could only be one of the 4. "I am sure this lizard was a Basilicus amoratus, a striped basilisk lizard found here in Costa Rica and also in Honduras. Standing on their hind legs, they are sometimes as tall as a foot." "Are they poisonous?" "Not at all," Gutierrez explained that the swelling in Tina's arm was an allergic reaction. "According to the literature, 14% of people are strongly allergic to reptiles," he said, "and your daughter seems to be one of them." "She was screaming. She said it was so painful," Ellen said. "Probably it was," Gutierrez said. "Reptile saliva contains serotonin, which causes tremendous pain." He turned to Cruz. "Her blood pressure came down with the antihistamines?" "Yes," Cruz said, "promptly." "Serotonin," Gutierrez said. "No question." Still, Ellen Bowman remained uneasy. But why would a lizard bite her in the first place? "Lizard bites are very common," Gutierrez said. "Just the other day I heard that a lizard had bitten an infant in her crib about 60 miles from where you were. Bites do occur, although I'm not sure why your daughter had so many. What was she doing at the time?" "Nothing. She said she was sitting pretty still because she didn't want to frighten it away." "Sitting pretty still," Gutierrez said, frowning. He shook his head. "Well, I don't think we can say exactly what happened. Wild animals are unpredictable." Mike Bowman then showed Gutierrez the picture that Tina had drawn. Gutierrez nodded. "I would accept this as a picture of a basilisk lizard," he said. "A few details are wrong, of course. The neck is much too long, and she has drawn the hind legs with only 3 toes instead of 5. The tail is too thick and raised too high. But otherwise, this is a perfectly serviceable lizard of the kind we are talking about." "But Tina specifically said the neck was long," Ellen Bowman said, "and she said there were 3 toes on the foot." "Tina's pretty observant," Mike Bowman said. "I'm sure she is," Gutierrez said, smiling, "but I still think your daughter was bitten by a common Basilisk amoratus and had a severe herpetological reaction. Normal time course with medication is 12 hours. She should be just fine in the morning." In the modern laboratory in the basement of the Clinica Santa Maria, word was received that Dr. Gutierrez had identified the animal that had bitten the American child as a harmless basilisk lizard. Immediately, the analysis of the saliva was halted, even though a preliminary fractionation showed several extremely high molecular weight proteins of unknown biological activity. But the night technician was busy, and he stored the saliva samples in the holding shelf of the refrigerator. The next morning, the day clerk checked the holding shelf against the names of discharged patients. Seeing that Bowman Christina L. was scheduled for discharge that morning, the clerk threw out the saliva samples. At the last moment, he noticed that one sample had the red tag, which meant that it was to be forwarded to the university lab in San Jose. He retrieved the test tube from the wastebasket and sent it on its way.
Tina's drawing of the lizard and the story of her attack greatly troubled Martin Gutierrez. Despite what he had told the Bowmans, he had never heard of a basilisk lizard biting anyone. He called the medical officer in Amaloya, who confirmed that in the last 2 months there had been several reported incidents of green lizards with brown stripes biting sleeping infants and children. This led Gutierrez to suspect the presence of a previously unknown species of lizard. Since lizards carried viral diseases, Gutierrez was determined to find the new lizard and have it tested. He spent an entire day at the beach where Tina had been bitten looking for the lizard. He had brought with him an air pistol and ligamine darts. He was about ready to go home when he spotted a howler monkey along the edge of the mangrove swamp. It was eating a green lizard with brown stripes. Gutierrez fired a dart, striking the monkey in the thigh. The howler fled into the jungle, leaving the remains of its meal behind. Gutierrez collected the lizard's remains, wrote a preliminary report, and sent both off to the acknowledged expert on lizard taxonomy, Edward H. Simpson, Emeritus Professor of Zoology at Columbia University in New York. Simpson was away on a field trip. His secretary read the customs manifest on the biological specimen container from Costa Rica. Since a child had been bitten, she figured that the most pressing question was whether the unknown species of lizard was carrying a disease. She therefore sent the container to Dr. Richard Stone, head of the Tropical Diseases Laboratory of the University Medical Center. Stone could find no evidence of communicable viral, parasitic, or bacterial disease, and faxed his findings to Gutierrez. Gutierrez concluded that the recent episodes of sporadic lizard bites had no serious health implications for Costa Rica. Probably a species of lizard had been driven out of the forest into a new habitat and was coming into contact with village people. Gutierrez was now certain that in a few more weeks the lizards would settle down and the biting episodes would end.
The tropical rain fell in great drenching sheets, hammering the corrugated roof of the clinic building in Bahia Anasco. It was nearly midnight. Power had been lost in the storm, and the midwife, Elena Morales, was working by flashlight when she heard a squeaking, chirping sound. She quickly went into the next room to check on the newborn baby. The infant lay in a wicker bassinet, swaddled in a light blanket, only its face exposed. Around the rim of the bassinet, 3 dark green lizards crouched like gargoyles. When they saw Elena, they cocked their heads and stared curiously, but did not flee. In the light of her flashlight, Elena saw the blood dripping from their snouts. Softly chirping, one lizard bent down and with a quick shake of its head, tore a ragged chunk of flesh from the baby. Elena rushed forward, screaming, and the lizards fled into the darkness. But long before she reached the bassinet, she could see what had happened to the infant's face, and she knew the child was dead. The lizards scattered into the rainy night, chirping and squealing, leaving behind only bloody three-toed tracks like birds. The university lab in San Jose that analyzed the saliva sample from Tina Bowman's arm made a remarkable discovery. Aside from having a great deal of serotonin, the sample also showed quantities of the enzyme gamma-amino methionine hydrolase. Because this enzyme was a marker for genetic engineering and not found in wild animals, technicians assumed it was a lab contaminant and did not report it when they called Dr. Cruz. The lizard fragment, meanwhile, rested in the freezer at Columbia University, awaiting the return of Dr. Simpson, who was not expected for at least a month. And so things might have remained had not a technician named Alice Levin walked into the Tropical Diseases Laboratory, seen Tina Bowman's picture, and said, "Oh, whose kid drew the dinosaur?" "This is a lizard," Richard Stone said, "from Costa Rica. A girl drew a picture of it." "No," Alice Levin said, shaking her head. "Look at it. It's very clear. Big head, long neck, stands on its hind legs, thick tail. It's a dinosaur." "It can't be. It was only a foot tall." "So? There were little dinosaurs back then," Alice said. "Believe me, I know. I have 2 boys. I'm an expert." "You don't understand," Richard Stone said. "This is a picture of a contemporary animal. They sent us a fragment of the animal. It's in the freezer now." Stone went and got it, and shook it out of the baggie. Alice Levin looked at the frozen piece of leg and tail. "You know," she said, "if this is a dinosaur, Richard, it could be a big deal." "It's not a dinosaur." "Has anybody checked it?" "No," Stone said. "Well, take it to the Museum of Natural History or something," Alice Levin said. "You really should." "You want me to do it for you?" she said. "No," Richard Stone said, "I don't." "You're not going to do anything?" "Nothing at all." He put the baggie back in the freezer and slammed the door. Ellie Sattler brushed a strand of blonde hair back from her face and turned her attention to the acid baths. She had 6 in a row, at molar strengths from 5 to 30%. She had to keep an eye on the stronger solutions because they would eat through the limestone and begin to erode the bones. And infant dinosaur bones were so fragile. She marveled that they had been preserved at all, after 80 million years. She listened idly to Alan Grant speaking on the telephone to a woman named Alice Levin, who had just called from Columbia Medical Center. "Miss Levin, this is Alan Grant. What's this about, you have what, a what?" He began to laugh. "I doubt that very much, Miss Levin. No, I really don't have time. I'm sorry." "Well, I'd take a look at it, but I can pretty much guarantee it's a basilisk lizard." "But, yes, you can do that. All right. Send it now." Grant hung up, and Ellie said, "What's it about?" "Some lizard in Central America she's trying to identify," Grant said. "She's going to fax me an X-ray." He walked over to the fax and waited as the transmission came through. Alan Grant, a barrel-chested, bearded man of 45, was a professor of paleontology and one of the foremost researchers in his field. Ellie's specialty was paleobotany. "Incidentally, I've got a new find for you," Alan Grant said to her. "A good one." "Yes?" Grant nodded. "Found it on South Hill this afternoon, Horizon 4. Infant velociraptor, jaw and complete dentition, so there's no question about identity. And the site looks undisturbed. We might even get a full skeleton." "That's fantastic," Ellie said. "Maybe our luck has finally turned," Grant said. Situated for the last 2 years in the Badlands outside Snakewater, Montana, Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler had thus far only excavated duck-billed hadrosaurs. They already had evidence for the vast herds of these grazing dinosaurs, roaming the Cretaceous plains in groups of 10 or 20,000. But increasingly the question that faced them was, where were the predators? They expected predators to be rare, of course. Studies of predator-prey populations in the game parks of Africa and India suggested that, roughly speaking, there was 1 predatory carnivore for every 400 herbivores. That meant a herd of 10,000 duckbills would support only 25 tyrannosaurs, so it was unlikely that they would find the remains of a large predator. But where were the smaller predators? Snakewater had dozens of nesting sites. In some places, the ground was literally covered with fragments of dinosaur eggshells, and many small dinosaurs ate eggs. Animals like Dromaeosaurus, Oviraptor, Velociraptor, and Coelurus, predators 3 to 6 feet tall, must have been found here in abundance. But they had discovered none so far. Perhaps this Velociraptor skeleton did mean their luck had changed, and an infant. Ellie knew that one of Grant's dreams was to study infant-rearing behavior in carnivorous dinosaurs. Perhaps this was the first step toward that dream. The baby Velociraptor had probably scavenged, feeding off carcasses slain by the adults, after the big animals had gorged themselves and lay basking in the sun. Carnivores could eat as much as 25% of their body weight in a single meal, and it made them sleepy afterward. The babies would chitter and scramble over the indulgent, somnolent bodies of the adults and nip little bites from the dead animal. The babies were probably cute little animals, but an adult velociraptor was another matter entirely. Pound for pound, a velociraptor was the most rapacious dinosaur that ever lived. Although relatively small, about 200 pounds, the size of a leopard, velociraptors were quick, intelligent, and vicious, able to attack with sharp jaws, powerful clawed forearms, and a devastating single claw on the foot. Velociraptors hunted in packs, and Grant thought it must have been a sight to see a dozen of those animals racing at full speed, leaping onto the back of a much larger dinosaur, tearing at the neck and slashing at the ribs and belly. "You must be pretty excited," Ellie said. Grant didn't answer. "I said you must be excited," Ellie repeated. "My God," Grant said. He was staring at the facts. Ellie Sadler's first thought as she looked over Grant's shoulder at the X-ray was that it was a hoax. An ingenious, skillful hoax, but a hoax nonetheless. The essence of a successful hoax was that it presented scientists with what they expected to see, and to Ellie's eye, the X-ray image of the lizard was exactly correct. She gave a long exhalation. "You think it's an Ammassachus?" "Yes," Grant said, "or a Triassachus. The skeleton is so light." "But it's no lizard," she said. "No," Grant said, "this is not a lizard. No three-toed lizard has walked on this planet for 200 million years." Ellie was shaking her head. "You really think this is an X-ray of a dinosaur?" "Maybe," Grant said. "I'd want to examine the actual specimen, but in a sense the X-ray is a better confirmation. It's almost impossible to fake an X-ray." "How do you explain it?" "Legitimate rediscovery," Grant said. "Zoology has many examples of supposedly extinct animals being rediscovered." "But is it real? What about the age?" Grant nodded. "The age is a problem. Most rediscovered extinct animals were rather recent additions to the fossil record, 10 or 20,000 years old. Some were a few million years old, but if the X-ray was genuine, the specimen they were looking at was much, much older. It dated back to the Triassic, the earliest dinosaur era, roughly 220 million years ago. Ellie said, "It just seems difficult to imagine that this animal has survived into the present." "True," Grant said. "On the other hand, we know animals do survive. Crocodiles are basically Triassic animals living in the present. Sharks are Triassic, so we know it has happened before. The thing is, how else do we explain it? It's either a fake, which I doubt, or else it's a rediscovery. What else could it be?"
Earlier that day, Alan Grant had been visited by Bob Morris, a representative of the Environmental Protection Agency, who wanted to know more about Grant's dealings with the Hammond Foundation, as well as a company called the InGen Corporation. Grant told Morris that for the past several years, John Hammond, through his respected academic grant institute, the Hammond Foundation, had supplied Grant's dinosaur research team with $30,000 a year in funding. Hammond, an elderly, fabulously wealthy business executive, was a dinosaur nut who came to visit Grant at his research sites every summer. Grant told Morris that several years ago he had been approached by the legal counsel for the InGen Corporation, a man named Donald Gennaro, with a request for consulting services. Gennaro offered Grant $50,000 to write a paper on the eating habits of dinosaurs. He told Grant that InGen was planning a museum for children that would feature replicas of baby dinosaurs as part of the exhibits. Gennaro said he was hiring a number of academic consultants on the project, other paleontologists, as well as ecologists, a systems analyst, and a world-renowned mathematician, Ian Malcolm. Grant had accepted Gennaro's offer and sent him a complete report on all he knew about the eating habits of dinosaurs. But Gennaro wasn't satisfied. and began calling Grant, sometimes in the middle of the night, with frantic questions. Would the dinosaurs eat this? Would they eat that? Should the exhibit include this? Grant got tired of Gennaro and called the deal off, settling for $12,000. Not long after this, the Hammond Foundation had stepped forward with funding for Grant's dinosaur research activities. Bob Morris told Alan Grant that InGen was actually a company owned by Hammond, and that the EPA was conducting a complete investigation into Hammond and InGen's top-secret genetics research projects on an island off Costa Rica. Later that afternoon, John Hammond telephoned Alan Grant. He had gotten wind of Bob Morris's visit and wanted all the details. Alan complied. He also told Hammond about the discovery of the velociraptor skeleton and the X-ray of the possible living dinosaur specimen, which Grant now believed to be a Procompsognathus amazicus, collected from Costa Rica.
You say Costa Rica?
Hammond asked. Yes, Grant said.
Where in Costa Rica, do you know?
A beach on the Pacific coast called Cabo Blanco.
I see.
Hammond cleared his throat.
And when did this, specimen arrive in your hands?
Just today.
Today, I see, yes.
He cleared his throat again.
Dr. Grant, have you told anybody about it yet?
No.
Good, that's good.
He coughed, then continued, clearly agitated.
Well, I'll tell you frankly, Dr. Grant, first of all, about this EPA business. I think this Morris is trying to get down to Costa Rica, poke around, get onto our island. You know, we have an island down there.
No, Grant said, I didn't know.
Oh, yes, we bought it and started our operation, 4 or 5 years ago now, called Isla Nublar. Big island, 100 miles offshore. Tropical jungle, going to be a biological preserve. Wonderful place, big park, it's got everything. We've been in construction now 30 months. Opens in September next year. And you see, Dr. Grant, I'm having a little problem about this island. This EPA thing is coming at just the wrong time.
How's that, Grant said?
Well, we've had our problems and some delays. Let's just say that I'm under pressure here, and I'd like you to look at this island for me. Give me your opinion. If you come down this weekend, I'll pay you $20,000 a day. That'd be $60,000 for 3 days. And if you can spare Dr. Sadler, she'll go at the same rate. We need a botanist. What do you say?
Well, Mr. Hammond, that much money would fully finance our expeditions for the next 2 summers.
Good, good,
Hammond said blandly. He seemed distracted.
I want this to be easy. Now, I'm sending the corporate jet to pick you up at that private airfield east of Choto. You know the one I mean? It's only about 2 hours' drive from where you are. You be there at 5 p.m. tomorrow, and I'll be waiting for you. Can you and Dr. Sadler make that plane?
I guess we can.
Good. Pack lightly. You don't need passports. See you tomorrow,
Hammond said, and he hung up. Midday sun streamed into the San Francisco law offices of Cohen, Swain, and Ross, giving the room a cheerfulness that Donald Gennaro did not feel. I understand, John, Gennaro said. And Grant agreed to come? Good, good. Yes, that sounds fine to me. My congratulations, John. He hung up the phone and turned to his boss, Daniel Ross, cold as an undertaker in his dark pinstripe suit. We just can't trust Hammond anymore, Gennaro said. He's under too much pressure. The EPA's investigating him. He's behind schedule on his Costa Rican resort, and our investors are getting nervous. There have been too many rumors of problems down there. Too many workmen have died. And now this business about a living, pre-composite whatever on the mainland? What does that mean, Ross said. Maybe nothing, Gennaro said, but Hamachi is one of our principal investors. I got a report last week from Hamachi's representative in San Jose, which said that some new kind of lizard is biting children on the coast. Ross blinked. New lizard? Yes, new lizard. As in new reptile, Gennaro said. We can't screw around with this. We've got to inspect that island right away. And what does Hammond say? He insists nothing is wrong on the island, claims he has all these security precautions. But you don't believe him, Ross said. No, Gennaro said, I don't. Hammond's a dreamer. Yes, Ross said, a potentially dangerous dreamer. It was very unwise for us to go into business with him. It seemed wise at the time, Gennaro said. Hell, it was 8 years ago. We took it in lieu of some fees, and if you remember, Hammond's plan was extremely speculative. Nobody really thought he could pull it off. But apparently he has, Ross said. In any case, I agree that an inspection is overdue. I've arranged independent site inspections every week for the next 3 weeks, Gennaro said. He tossed a list onto Ross's desk. I'm starting with experts Hammond already hired as consultants early in the project. First group is a paleontologist, Alan Grant, a paleobotanist, Ellie Sadler, a mathematician, Ian Malcolm, and a technical person, a computer system analyst, who will review the park's computers and fix some bugs. They all go down this weekend. I'll go with them. Will they tell you the truth, Ross said. I think so. None of them had much to do with the island, and one of them, the mathematician Ian Malcolm, was openly hostile to the project from the start. Insisted it would never work, could never work. Fine, Ross said. You're making the arrangements? Hammond asked to place the calls himself. I think he wants to pretend that he's not in trouble, that it's just a social invitation, showing off his island. All right, Ross said, but just make sure it happens. Stay on top of it. I want this Costa Rican situation resolved within a week. My boy, the familiar raspy voice said. How have you been, my boy? Very well, sir, Gennaro replied. He leaned back in the padded leather chair of the Gulfstream II jet as it flew east, toward the Rocky Mountains. You never call me anymore, Hammond said reproachfully. I've missed you, Donald. Gennaro had forgotten how short Hammond was. He was only 5'4" as he sat in the chair. His feet didn't touch the carpeting. He swung his legs as he talked. There was a childlike quality to the man, even though Hammond must be now, 75? Is the park ready for visitors, Gennaro asked. Well, not officially, Hammond said. But the hotel is built, so there is a place to stay. And the animals? Oh, yes, the animals are all there. Gennaro said, I remember you were looking for a total of 12. Oh, we're far beyond that. We're far beyond that. We have 238 animals, Donald. 238? The old man giggled, pleased at Gennaro's reaction. How many species, Gennaro asked. 15 different species, Donald. That's incredible, Gennaro said. And all the other things you wanted, the facilities, the computers? All of it. All of it, Hammond said. Everything on that island is state-of-the-art. You'll see for yourself, Donald, it's perfectly wonderful. That's why all this concern is so misplaced. There's absolutely no way an animal can get off the island. We're talking about the most advanced amusement park in the world, Hammond said. Combining the latest electronic and biological technologies. And the plain fact is, when you put together all the animals and all the computer systems, you run into snags. So you've just had normal startup delays. Donald, Hammond said, putting his hand on the younger man's arm, believe me when I tell you that everything on the island is going as planned. Everything on that island is perfectly fine. Even when many fields of science, such as physics and biology, became federally funded, paleontology remained strongly dependent on private patrons. Grant had received many years of funding from John Hammond, and he hoped for several years more. Quite apart from his own curiosity about what might be happening in Costa Rica, Grant understood that if John Hammond asked for his help, Grant would give it. That was how patronage worked, how it had always worked. The little jet landed, came to a stop in front of Grant and Ellie, and a stewardess in a blue uniform opened the door. Inside, Grant was surprised at how cramped it was, despite the luxurious appointments. Grant had to hunch over as he went to shake Hammond's hand. "Dr. Grant and Dr. Sadler," Hammond said, "it's good of you to join us. Allow me to introduce my associate, Donald Gennaro." Gennaro was a stocky, muscular man of 35 wearing an Armani suit and wire-frame glasses. Grant disliked him on sight. He shook hands with him quickly. "Take your seats, please," the stewardess said, closing the door. Immediately, the plane began to move. "You'll have to excuse us," Hammond said, "but we're in a bit of a rush. Donald thinks it's important that we get down there." The pilot announced 4 hours flying time to Dallas, where they would refuel before going on to Costa Rica, arriving the following morning. Grant buckled his seatbelt. "This island of yours that we're going to, I haven't heard anything about it before. Is it some kind of secret?" "In a way," Hammond said. "We have been very, very careful about making sure nobody knows about it, until the day we finally open that island to a surprised and delighted public." The Biosyn Corporation of Cupertino, California, had never called an emergency meeting of its board of directors. The 10 directors sat in the conference room at 8 o'clock one evening listening to Louis Dodgson. Depending on who you talked to, Louis Dodgson was famous as the most aggressive geneticist of his generation, or the most reckless. 34 years old, he had been dismissed by Johns Hopkins as a graduate student for planning gene therapy on human patients without obtaining the proper FDA protocols. Now he was the head of product development at Biosyn. Product development consisted of what was called reverse engineering, taking a competitor's product, tearing it apart, learning how it worked, and making your own version. In practice, it involved industrial espionage, and much of that espionage was directed toward InGen Corporation. In the 1980s, a few genetic engineering companies began to ask, what is the biological equivalent of a Sony Walkman? These companies weren't interested in pharmaceuticals or health. They were interested in entertainment, sports, leisure activities, cosmetics, and pets. The perceived demand for consumer biologicals in the 1990s was high. InGen and Biosyn were both at work in this field. Biosyn had already achieved some success, engineering a new pale trout. The trout was easier to spot in streams and was said to represent a step forward in angling. The fact that the pale trout sometimes died of sunburn and that its flesh was soggy and tasteless was not discussed. "Gentlemen," Dodgson said, "we're here tonight to consider a target of opportunity, InGen Corporation." He quickly reviewed the background. InGen's startup in 1983 with primarily Japanese investors, the purchase of 3 Cray XMP supercomputers, the purchase of an island in Costa Rica, Isla Nublar, the stockpiling of amber, the hard yellow resin of dry tree sap, the unusual donations to zoos in New York, Berlin, Africa, and India. Despite all these clues, Dodgson said, we still had no idea where InGen might be going. The company seemed obviously focused on animals, and they had hired researchers with an interest in the past, paleobiologists, DNA phylogeneticists, a herpetologist, and so on. Then, in 1987, InGen bought an obscure company called Millipore Plastic Products in Nashville, Tennessee. This was an agribusiness company that had recently patented a new plastic with the characteristics of an avian eggshell. This plastic could be shaped into an egg and used to grow chick embryos. At the same time, Dodgson continued, construction was begun on Isla Nublar. This involved massive earthworks, including a shallow lake 2 miles long, in the center of the island. It appears that InGen has built a private zoo of large dimensions on the island. One of the directors leaned forward and said, "Dr. Dodgson, so what?" "It's not an ordinary zoo," Dodgson said. "This zoo is unique in the world. It seems that InGen has done something quite extraordinary. They have managed to clone extinct animals from the past." "What animals?" "Animals that hatch from eggs and that require a lot of room in a zoo." "What animals?" "Dinosaurs," Dodgson said. "They are cloning dinosaurs." There had been discussion of cloning dinosaurs in the technical literature as far back as 1982. With each passing year, the manipulation of DNA had grown easier, including the manipulation of prehistoric DNA. DNA had already been extracted from Egyptian mummies and from the hide of the quagga, a zebra-like African animal which had become extinct in the 1880s. By 1985, it was possible that quagga DNA might be reconstituted and a new animal grown. If that was possible, what else was also possible? The mastodon, the saber-toothed tiger, the dodo, or even a dinosaur. Of course, no dinosaur DNA was known to exist anywhere in the world. But by grinding up large quantities of dinosaur bones, it might be possible to extract fragments of DNA. Formerly, it was thought that fossilization eliminated all DNA. Now that was recognized as untrue. If enough DNA fragments were found, it might be possible to clone a living animal. InGen had apparently decided to try. What they have done, Dodgson said, is build the greatest single tourist attraction in the history of the world. And for this zoo, InGen can charge whatever admission price they want. $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day. And there's the merchandising, the picture books, T-shirts, video games, caps, stuffed toys, comic books, and pets. Pets? One of the directors asked. Of course. If InGen can make full-size dinosaurs, they can also make pygmy dinosaurs as household pets. What child won't want a little dinosaur as a pet? A little patented InGen animal for their very own. InGen will sell millions of them, and InGen will engineer them so that these pet dinosaurs can only eat InGen dinosaur pet food. Jesus, somebody said. We've got to get into this. I agree, Dodgson said. The dinosaurs will be patented. Yes, genetically engineered animals can now be patented. The Supreme Court ruled on that in favor of Harvard in 1987. InGen will own its dinosaurs, and no one else can legally make them. What prevents us from creating our own dinosaurs, someone said. Nothing, except that they have a 5-year head start. It'll be almost impossible to catch up before the end of the century. Then what do we do? Well, Dodgson said, if we could obtain examples of their dinosaurs, we could reverse engineer them and make our own, with just enough modifications in the DNA to evade their patents. Can we obtain examples of their dinosaurs? Dodgson paused. I believe we can, yes. Somebody cleared his throat. There wouldn't be anything illegal. Oh, no, Dodgson said quickly. Nothing illegal. I'm talking about a legitimate source, a disgruntled employee. Do you have a legitimate source, Dr. Dodgson? I do, Dodgson said, but I am afraid there is some urgency to the decision, because InGen is experiencing a small crisis, and my source will have to act within the next 24 hours. A long silence descended over the room. The men looked at the secretary taking notes, and the tape recorder on the table in front of her. Slowly the heads nodded. Nobody spoke. Nobody went on record. They just nodded, silently. Thank you for coming, gentlemen, Dodgson said. I'll take it from here. Louis Dodgson entered the coffee shop in the departure building of the San Francisco airport and looked around quickly. His man was already there, waiting at the counter. Dodgson sat down next to him and placed the briefcase on the floor between them. Bioengineered DNA was, weight for weight, the most valuable material in the world. A single microscopic bacterium, too small to see with the naked eye, but containing the genes for a heart attack enzyme, streptokinase, or for ice-, which prevented frost damage to crops, might be worth $5 billion to the right buyer. And that fact of life had created a bizarre new world of industrial espionage. Dodgson was skilled at it. But InGen presented a tough challenge. Dodgson wanted more than bacterial DNA. He wanted frozen embryos. Dodgson had finally located a willing InGen employee. And now InGen was inviting contractors and advisors to visit the island prior to the official opening of the resort. It was the moment that Dodgson had been waiting for, because it meant his man would have access to the embryos. Let's get down to it, the man said. I've got 10 minutes before my flight. I want to see the money. Dodgson flipped the latch on the briefcase and opened it a few inches. The man glanced down casually. Dodgson quickly locked the briefcase. That's for all 15 species. You remember? "I remember," the man said. 15 species, frozen embryos. How am I going to transport them?" Dodgson handed the man a large can of Gillette foamy shaving cream. "Press the top," he said. The man pressed it, and a white puff of shaving cream came into his hand. "Not bad. How much coolant gas is inside?" "Enough for 36 hours. The embryos have to be back in San Jose by then." "That's up to your guy in the boat," the man said. "Better make sure he has a portable cooler on board." "I'll do that," Dodgson said.
En route to Costa Rica, Hammond's jet stopped in Dallas to pick up Ian Malcolm, a tall, thin, balding man of 35, dressed completely in black. Malcolm was one of the most famous of the new generation of mathematicians who broke with traditional mathematics in several ways. For one thing, this new breed of mathematicians used computers constantly, and they worked almost exclusively with nonlinear equations, in the field broadly called chaos. Malcolm had a haughty, abrasive style, and behaved more like a rock star than a mathematician. He told Gennaro that he knew before laying eyes on Hammond's island project that the chaos theory ensured that the island would quickly proceed to behave in unpredictable fashion. The chaos theory held that even the simplest of systems, think of a pool ball on a pool table, could produce complex behavior. Malcolm was certain that the island was an accident waiting to happen. Hammond's jet picked up another passenger in San Jose, a sloppy-looking man named Dennis Nedry, who said he had flown in from the East Coast to do something about the computers on the island. In Costa Rica, Hammond and his guests switched to a helicopter for the final leg of their journey to Isla Nublar. After about 40 minutes in the copter, Grant saw a rugged island rising sharply from the ocean.
The forested slopes of Isla Nublar were wreathed in fog, giving the island a mysterious appearance. "The island is 8 miles long and 3 miles wide at the widest point," Hammond explained. "In total, some 22 square miles, making it the largest private animal preserve in North America." The helicopter started down, and immediately they were blanketed in fog. Grant could see nothing at all. Then he began dimly to discern the green branches of pine trees, reaching through the mist. The pilot touched down on a fluorescent-lit helipad. The sound of the rotors faded, then died. Someone was running up to the helicopter, a man with a baseball cap and red hair. He threw open the door and said cheerfully, "Hi, I'm Ed Regis. Welcome to Isla Nublar, everybody. And watch your step. That first one is a big one." A narrow path wound down the hill. The air was chilly and damp. As they moved lower, the mist around them thinned, and Grant could see the landscape better. It looked, he thought, rather like the Pacific Northwest. "The majority of the island is tropical, covered in palm trees," Hammond told them. Down below they could see the white roofs of large buildings nestled in among the planting. To the south, rising above the palm trees, was a single trunk with no leaves at all, just a big curving stump. Then the stump moved and twisted around to face the new arrivals. Grant realized that he was not seeing a tree at all. He was looking at the graceful curving neck of an enormous creature, easily 50 feet tall. He was looking at a dinosaur. The animal was a perfect Apatosaurus, a medium-sized sauropod, commonly called Brontosaurus. A second neck craned up above the palm trees, and then a third, and a fourth. "I take it they're not animatronic," Malcolm said. Hammond giggled. "No, they're real." From the distance they heard a trumpeting sound, like an elephant, but softer. First one animal made it, and then the others joined in. "That's their call," Ed Regis said, "welcoming you to the island." The group followed Ed Regis towards the nearest buildings. Over the path, a crude hand-painted sign read, "Welcome to Jurassic Park." They moved into a green tunnel of overarching palms leading toward the main visitor building. Everywhere, extensive and elaborate planting emphasized the feeling that they were entering a new world, a prehistoric tropical world, and leaving the normal world behind. Up ahead, Grant saw a big 2-story building surrounded by palm trees. A sign said it was the visitor center. Ed Regis led them off to the right, down another path, and pointed out to them the Safari Lodge, a dramatic, long, low building with a series of glass pyramids on the roof. The entire lodge was enclosed within a fence, with bars of inch-thick steel. The fence was gracefully landscaped and painted flat black to resemble wrought iron. but no cosmetic effort could disguise the thickness of the metal, or its 12-foot height. "We're about to tour the facilities," Gennaro said. "Basically, this is an island in which genetically engineered dinosaurs have been allowed to move in a natural park-like setting, forming a tourist attraction. The attraction isn't open to tourists yet, but it will be in a year. Presumably, the island is safe for visitors, and presumably the animals are securely contained here. It would be a disaster if these prehistoric creatures were to get off the island. Now, my question for you is a simple one. Is this island safe? Is it safe for visitors, and is it safely containing the dinosaurs? Have any dinosaurs already gotten off the island?" The reason I ask is there are two pieces of evidence which we have to deal with. First of all, there is Dr. Grant's identification of a previously unknown dinosaur on the Costa Rican mainland. Dr. Grant can tell you more later. I've asked for the original fragment, which is in a lab in New York, to be flown here so that we can inspect it directly. Meanwhile, there is a second piece of evidence. Beginning in March, there were reports in Costa Rica of lizards biting infants in their cribs. Now, are there... "Excuse me," Gennaro said, "but I think I hear the helicopter. That's probably the sample for Dr. Grant to look at." He started out of the room. They all followed. At the foot of the mountain, Gennaro was screaming over the sound of the helicopter. The veins of his neck stood out. "You did what? You invited who?" "Take it easy," Hammond said. Gennaro screamed, "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" Grant turned and saw two children coming down the hillside, led by Ed Regis. There was a boy of about 10 or 11 and a girl a few years younger, perhaps 7 or 8. They made their way nimbly down the path from the helipad and stopped some distance from Gennaro and Hammond. Low, under his breath, Gennaro said, "Christ." "Now take it easy," Hammond said. "Their parents are getting a divorce, and I want them to have a fun weekend." The girl waved tentatively. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "We're here." Tim Murphy, 11, could see at once that something was wrong. His grandfather was in the middle of an argument with the younger, red-faced man facing him, and the other adult standing behind looked embarrassed and uncomfortable. His sister, Alexis, Lex for short, felt the tension too, because she hung back, nervously clutching a ball and baseball mitt. Ed Regis said cheerfully, "I'll introduce you to everybody, and then we can take the tour." The introductions were a blur to Tim. He was trying to organize his impressions and was looking at the blonde woman's legs when he suddenly realized that he knew who the bearded man was. "Your mouth is open," Lex said. Tim said, "I know him." "Oh, sure. You just met him." "No," Tim said. "I have his book." The bearded man said, "What book is that, Tim?" "Lost World of the Dinosaurs," Tim said. Alexis snickered. "Daddy says that Tim has dinosaurs on the brain." "Dinosaurs on the brain?" Alan Grant said. "Well, as a matter of fact, I have that same problem." "All right, folks," Ed Regis said. "Let's begin our tour on the second floor." Tim went with the others, following Mr. Regis up a suspended black staircase. "You may have noticed that we have a minimum of personnel on the island," Ed Regis was saying. "We can run this resort with a total of 20 people. Of course, we'll have more when we have guests here, but at the moment, there's only 20. Here's our control room. The entire park is controlled from here." They paused before windows and peered into a darkened room that looked like a small version of Mission Control. There was a vertical glass see-through map of the park, and facing it, a bank of glowing computer consoles. Some of the screens displayed data, but most of them showed video images from around the park. "I'm sure you want to see this room," Ed Regis said. "But first, let's see how we obtain dinosaur DNA."
Ed Regis introduced the group to Henry Wu, a tall, slender man in his 30s. Wu was Jurassic Park's chief geneticist. Wu explained that the DNA strands used to create the dinosaurs came from amber, the fossilized resin of prehistoric tree sap. The tree sap had once flowed over biting insects, trapping and preserving them for centuries. Wu was able to extract the dinosaur DNA from those insects that had sucked the blood of dinosaurs. The supercomputers had been programmed to identify the extracted DNA and determine where it fit in the evolutionary sequence. The group next visited the fertilization room and hatchery. In the hatchery, the newly created dinosaur eggs were kept in a simulated Jurassic atmosphere of 99 degrees and 100% relative humidity. Wu explained that they had produced more than 24 crops of extractions, yielding a total of over 200 live animals thus far. The survival rate was somewhere around 0.4%. The dinosaurs matured rapidly, attaining full size in 2 to 4 years. There were already a number of adult specimens in the park.
The next stop was the nursery. It was a circular room, all white. There were some incubators of the kind used in hospital nurseries, but they were empty at the moment. Rags and toys were scattered across the floor. None of our animals is capable of breeding, Wu explained. That's why we have this nursery. It's the only way to replace stock in Jurassic Park. Why can't the animals breed? Grant asked. Well, Wu said, as you can imagine, it's important that they not be able to breed. And in fact, there are 2 independent reasons why they can't. First of all, they're sterile, because we irradiate them with X-rays. And the second reason? All the animals in Jurassic Park are female, Wu said. Ian Malcolm said, I should like some clarification about this, because it seems to me that irradiation is fraught with uncertainty. And as for them all being female, is that checked? Does anyone go out and lift up the dinosaur skirts to have a look? You probably know that all vertebrate embryos are inherently female, Wu explained. We all start life as females. It takes some kind of added effect, such as a hormone at the right moment during development, to transform the growing female embryo into a male. But left to its own devices, the embryo will become female, and we don't provide that hormone. So the animals are all female, and believe me, they can't breed. A young woman in a white coat was seated on the floor, her back to them. What have you got here today, Kathy? Dr. Wu asked. Not much, she said. Just a baby raptor. Let's have a look. The woman got to her feet and stepped aside. Tim heard Dennis Nedry, the computer analyst, say, It looks like a lizard. The animal on the floor was about 1.5 feet long, the size of a small monkey. It was dark yellow with brown stripes, like a tiger. It had a lizard's head and long snout, but it stood upright on strong hind legs, balanced by a thick, straight tail. Its smaller front legs waved in the air. It cocked its head to one side and peered at the visitors staring down at it. Velociraptor, Alan Grant said in a low voice. A predator, Wu said, nodding. This one's only 6 weeks old. I just excavated... Grant began as he bent down for a closer look. Immediately the little lizard sprang up, leaping over Grant's head into Tim's arms. Hey, Tim said. They can jump, Wu said. The babies can jump. So can the adults, as a matter of fact. Tim caught the velociraptor and held it to him. The little animal didn't weigh very much, 1 pound or 2. The skin was warm and completely dry. The little head was inches from Tim's face. Its dark, beady eyes stared at him. A small, forked tongue flicked in and out. Will he hurt me? No, she's friendly. Are you sure about that? Asked Gennaro, with a look of concern. Oh, quite sure, Wu said. At least until she grows a little older. The little velociraptor sniffed at Tim and then rubbed her head against Tim's neck. Tim giggled. The little raptor wiggled her forearms in the air. Tim saw the small claws on the 3 fingers of each hand. Then the raptor burrowed her head against his neck again. Can I stay and play with her? Tim said. Not right now, Ed Regis said, glancing at his watch. It's 3 o'clock and it's a good time for a tour of the park itself, so you can see all the dinosaurs and the habitats we've designed for them. Walking back toward the control room, Malcolm said, I have one more question, Dr. Wu. How many different species have you made so far? I'm not exactly sure, Wu said. I believe the number at the moment is 15. And is one of the 15 animals a... Malcolm turned to Grant. What was the name? Procompsognathus, Grant said. Oh, yes, Wu said immediately. We made an unusually large number of compies. We want Jurassic Park to be as real an environment as possible, and the Procompsognathids are scavengers from the Jurassic period. We wanted to have the compies around to clean up. It turns out that compies will eat the feces of large herbivores and redigest it. And you have to realize that we have some very big herbivores on this island. How many copies did you make? Malcolm asked. I think the target population was 50 animals, Wu said. 50 animals, Malcolm said, is a lot to keep track of. The control room is built to do exactly that. But if one of these copies were to escape from the island to get away... Well, they can't get away, Wu continued. Our animals are counted by computer every few minutes. If one were missing, we'd know at once. And in the outside world, our animals will die within 12 hours. How do you know? Look, we are not fools here, Wu said, finally showing a trace of irritation. These animals are genetically engineered to be unable to survive in the real world. They can only live here, in Jurassic Park. They are essentially not free at all. They are our prisoners. Here's the control room, Ed Regis said. Now that you know how the animals are made, you'll want to see the control room for the park itself. Before we go out on... He stopped. Through the thick glass window, the room was dark. The monitors were off, except for 3, which displayed spinning numbers in the image of a large boat. What's going on? Ed Regis said. Oh, hell, they're docking. Docking? Malcolm asked. Every 2 weeks a supply boat comes in from the mainland. One of the things this island doesn't have is a good harbor, or even a good dock. It's a little hairy to get the ship in when the seas are rough. Could be a few minutes. He rapped on the window, but the man inside paid no attention. I guess we have to wait then. Mr. Regis, are there any full-grown raptors? Grant asked. Yes, Regis said without hesitation. Will we see them on the tour? They haven't been integrated into the park setting just yet, Regis explained. We keep them in a holding pen. Can I see them there? Grant said. Why, yes, of course. In fact, while we're waiting, you might want to go around and have a look at them. Just go around the back of this building and you'll see the pen. Just don't get too close to the fence. He turned to Lex. You want to go too? No, Lex said. She looked appraisingly at Regis. You want to throw a few? Well, sure, Ed Regis said. Why don't you and I go downstairs and we'll do just that while we wait for the control room to open up. Grant walked with Ellie and Malcolm around the back of the main building, with Tim tagging along. They left the visitor area behind, past a grove of palm trees, and saw a large, low concrete shed with a steel roof. They looked inside and saw a huge generator. They heard bleating and walked north a few yards. They came to an animal enclosure with goats. By a quick count, Grant estimated there were 50 or 60 goats. What's that for? Ellie asked. Probably they feed them to the dinosaurs, Malcolm said. The group walked on, following a dirt path through a dense bamboo grove. At the far side, they came to a double-layer chain-link fence, 12 feet high, with spirals of barbed wire at the top. There was an electric hum along the outer fence. Beyond the fences, Grant saw dense clusters of large ferns, 5 feet high. He heard a snorting sound, a kind of snuffling, then the sound of crunching footsteps, coming closer. Ellie tapped him on the shoulder and pointed. Amid the ferns, Grant saw the head of an animal. It was motionless, partially hidden in the fronds, the 2 large dark eyes watching them coldly. The head was 2 feet long. From a pointed snout, a long row of teeth ran back to the hole of the auditory meatus, which served as an ear. The head reminded him of a large lizard, or perhaps a crocodile. The eyes did not blink, and the animal did not move. Its skin was leathery with a pebbled texture, and basically the same coloration as the infant, brown with a pattern of darker reddish markings, like the stripes of a tiger. As Grant watched, a single forelimb reached up very slowly to part the ferns beside the animal's face. The limb, Grant saw, was strongly muscled. The hand had 3 grasping fingers, each ending in curved claws. The hand gently, slowly pushed aside the ferns. Grant felt a chill and thought, he's hunting us. The attack came suddenly from the left and right. Charging raptors covered the 10 yards to the fence with shocking speed. Grant had a blurred impression of powerful 6-foot-tall bodies, stiff balancing tails, limbs with curving claws, open jaws with rows of jagged teeth. The animals snarled as they came forward and then leapt bodily into the air, raising their hind legs with their big dagger claws. Then they struck the fence in front of them, throwing off twin bursts of hot sparks. The velociraptors fell backward to the ground, hissing. The visitors all moved forward, fascinated. Only then did the third animal attack, leaping up to strike the fence at chest level. Tim screamed in fright as the sparks exploded all around him. The creatures snarled, a low reptilian hissing sound, and leapt back among the ferns. Then they were gone, leaving behind a faint odor of decay and hanging acrid smoke. "Pack hunters," Malcolm said. He sounded admiring. "Pack hunters for whom ambush is an instinct. Fascinating." A black man in overalls came running up to them. "Are you all right?" "We're okay," Grant said. The man looked at the fence, dented and charred. "They do that all the time. Hit the fence, take a shock. They never seem to mind." "Not too smart, are they?" Malcolm said. The black man paused. He squinted at Malcolm in the afternoon light. "Be glad for that fence, senor," he said, and turned away. Grant looked at all the computer monitors in the darkened control room, feeling irritable. He didn't like computers. "You want to know about control mechanisms?" John Arnold said, turning in his chair. Arnold was the head engineer, a thin, tense, chain-smoking man of 45. "We have unbelievable control mechanisms," he said. "For example," Gennaro said. "For example, animal tracking." Arnold pressed a button on his console, and the vertical glass map lit up with a pattern of jagged blue lines. "That's our juvenile T-Rex, Little Rex, all his movements within the park over the last 24 hours. Arnold pressed the button again. Previous 24, and again, previous 24. The lines on the map became densely overlaid, a child's scribble, but the scribble was localized in a single area, near the southeast side of the lagoon. "You get a sense of his home range over time," Arnold said. "He's young, so he stays close to the water, and he stays away from the big adult Rex. You put up Big Rex and Little Rex, and you'll see their paths never cross." "Where is the Big Rex now?" Gennaro asked. Arnold pushed another button. The map cleared, and a single glowing spot with a code number appeared in the fields northwest of the lagoon. "He's right there." "And Little Rex?" "Hell, I'll show you every animal in the park," Arnold said. The map began to light up like a Christmas tree, dozens of spots of light, each tagged with a code number. "That's 238 animals as of this minute." "Pretty impressive," Gennaro said. "How's it done?" "We have motion sensors all around the park," Arnold said. "They cover 92% of the land area. There are only a few places we can't use them, and if the computer tracks an animal into an unsensed zone, it'll remember and look for the animal to come out again. And if it doesn't, it gives us an alarm." "How about physical containment?" Gennaro said. "Can they get out of their enclosures?" "Absolutely not," Arnold said. "We maintain multiple barriers. First, the moats." He pressed a button, and the board lit up with a network of orange bars. "Next, the electrified fences. Lines of bright red glowed on the board. We have 50 miles of 12-foot-high fencing. All the park fences carry 10,000 volts. But if an animal did get out," Gennaro said. Arnold snorted. "Just hypothetically," Gennaro said. "Supposing it happened." "We go out and get the animal back," Arnold said. "We have lots of ways to do that. Laser shotguns, electrified nets, tranquilizers, all non-lethal." "What about this system itself?" Gennaro said. "Could anybody tamper with it?" Arnold was shaking his head. "The computer is independent in every way, independent power and independent backup power. The system does not communicate with the outside, so it cannot be influenced remotely by modem. The computer system is secure." "What about your mechanical systems? You mean the rides," Arnold said. Grant looked up sharply. "Wait a minute," he said. "You're going to have rides? Like an amusement park?" Arnold said, "This is a zoological park. We have tours of different areas, and we call them rides. That's all." Grant felt troubled. He didn't like the idea of dinosaurs being used for an amusement park. Malcolm said, "Now this control room, you can run the whole park from here?" "Yes," Arnold said. "This is the system Mr. Nedry designed?" Malcolm asked. "That's right," Nedry said. "It's a hell of a system," Arnold said proudly. "That's right," Nedry said absently. "Just one or two minor bugs to fix." "This way, everybody, this way," Ed Regis said.
A line of Toyota Land Cruisers came out of an underground garage beneath the visitor center and pulled up, driverless. Grant, Ellie, and Malcolm got into the first Land Cruiser with Gennaro. Tim and Lex got in the second car with Ed Regis. The cars were equipped with computer screens and a portable walkie-talkie. A pre-recorded voice piped in information about the dinosaur sections along the way. First up were the small, quick, herbivorous hypsilophodontids, the gazelles of the dinosaur world. Next came the dilophosaurs, easy to spot with their 10-foot-tall bodies spotted yellow and black like leopards. The dilophosaurs were among the earliest carnivorous dinosaurs, known for secreting a deadly poison from glands in their mouths. The group then came across the big T-Rex. Its head alone was 5 feet long, with huge jaws and fangs. They watched it devour a goat before disappearing silently into the trees. The land cruisers automatically stopped at the sauropod swamp, where a large apatosaurus herd was grazing at the edge of the lagoon. These big animals were often mistakenly called brontosaurus. In the same area were several duck-billed hadrosaurs, each the size of 2 elephants, although they appeared tiny next to the giant animals in the apatosaurus herd.
Suddenly there was the rolling growl of thunder. The sky was darker, lower, and menacing. "Looks like rain," Ed Regis said.
We move on now to see the last of our prehistoric animals, the stegosaurs,
the recorded voice said. The car started to move forward, and Tim looked back at the hadrosaurs. Suddenly, off to one side, he saw a pale yellow animal moving quickly. There were brownish stripes on its back. He recognized it instantly. "Hey!" he shouted. "Stop the car!" "What is it?" Ed Regis said. "Quick, stop the car. I saw one. I saw one in the field out there." "Saw what?" "A raptor, in that field." "Oh, I don't think so, Tim," Ed Regis said. "Not a raptor." "I did, I swear it. Stop the car." There was a babble on the intercom as the news was relayed to Grant and Malcolm. "Tim says he saw a raptor."
Where?
"Back at the field."
Let's go back and look.
"We can't go back," Ed Regis said. "We can only go forward. The cars are programmed."
Tim, this is Professor Malcolm,
said a voice cutting in on the intercom.
I have just one question for you about this raptor. How old would you say it was?
"Older than the baby we saw today," Tim said, "and younger than the big adults in the pen. The adults were 6 feet tall. This one was about half that size." "I'm sure it wasn't a raptor," Ed Regis said. "Couldn't possibly be a raptor. Must have been one of the Othies. They're always jumping their fences. We have a hell of a time with them." I would hope that the boy is incorrect," Malcolm said. "Jesus, so would I," Gennaro said. "Raptors out there loose?" He shuddered. "I don't know," Ellie said. "It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Raptors are carnivorous predators. They live by killing other animals. If there are free-living raptors in the park, what are they killing?" "And why hasn't the control room picked them up?" Grant said. "What do you think the kid saw?" Arnold said to Wu. "I think it must have been an Othie." "What burns me," Hammond said, "is that we have made this wonderful park, this fantastic park, and our very first visitors are going through it like accountants, just looking for problems. They aren't experiencing the wonder of it all." "That's their problem," Arnold said. "We can't make them experience wonder." On the video monitor, they saw the crew of the cargo vessel on the decks, casting off the lines. On the main console bank, they watched the land cruisers moving through fields of steam. "Where are they now?" Hammond said. "They should be almost to the Stegos," Arnold said. "I'm sure they'll stop and see what Harding is doing."
Dr. Harding, Jurassic Park's vet, had a sick stegosaurus on his hands. Its 20-foot-long body with vertical armor plates along its back was drooped, and the animal breathed laboriously. The group watched Dr. Harding tranquilize the animal for treatment. While Ellie helped out with the vet's examination, Grant explored the rocky grounds of the Stegosaurus section of Jurassic Park. He made an astounding discovery. Fragments of a dinosaur egg, a velociraptor egg to be exact. When Grant showed the pieces of the egg to Dr. Harding, the vet insisted that Grant was mistaken. Since all the animals on Jurassic Park were female, breeding was impossible. It defied the laws of nature. But Grant was convinced he had found a real dinosaur egg. And Malcolm was convinced that his chaos theory had new evidence for support. No matter how well-planned or well-managed Jurassic Park was, the history of evolution guaranteed that life would escape all barriers. Life breaks free, life expands to new territories, Malcolm insisted. Painfully, perhaps even dangerously, but life finds a way. The group radioed back to the control room, and Arnold did a computer count of the animals on Jurassic Park. The computer showed the expected 238 animals, and pinpointed their exact whereabouts. But Malcolm detected a flaw in Arnold's programming procedure, and instructed him to have the computer do the tally another way. This time the computer showed a revised animal count of 292. There were increases in the populations of the Compies, Othnielia, the Myosaurs, the Hypsies, and the Velociraptors in 7 different sites around the island.
I think these numbers confirm that breeding is taking place, Grant said. Assuming the average clutch is 8 to 12 hatching eggs, this data would indicate the Compies have 2 nests. The Raptors have 2 nests, the Othies have 1 nest, and the Hypsies and the Mayas have 1 nest each. Where are these nests? We'll have to find them, Grant said. Dinosaurs build their nests in secluded places.
But why are there so few big animals?
Wu said.
If there is a Maya nest of 8 to 12 eggs, there should be 8 to 12 new Mayas, not just 1.
That's right, Grant said, except that the raptors and the Compies that are loose in the park are probably eating the eggs of the bigger animals, and perhaps eating the newly hatched young as well.
But we've never seen that,
Arnold said. Raptors are nocturnal, Grant said. Is anyone watching the park at night? There was a long silence. I didn't think so, Grant said. Gennaro said impatiently, listen, this is all very intriguing, but we're forgetting the main question. Have any animals gotten off the island? Grant said, we can't tell from these data. Then how are we going to find out? There's only one way I know, Grant said. We'll have to find the individual dinosaur nests, inspect them, and count the remaining egg fragments. From that we may be able to determine how many animals were originally hatched, and we can begin to assess whether any are missing. Malcolm said, even so you won't know if the missing animals are killed or dead from natural causes or whether they have left the island. No, Grant said, but it's a start. And I think we can get more information from an intensive look at the population graphs. The computer will be able to help us. Can we go back now, Lex said. It's getting dark, and I'm hungry. Yes, let's go, Grant said, smiling at her. You've been very patient. You'll be able to eat in about 20 minutes, Ed Regis said, starting toward the 2 land cruisers. I'll stay for a while, Ellie said, and get photos of the Stego with Dr. Harding's camera. I want to get back, Grant said. I'll go with the kids. I will too, Malcolm said. I think I'll stay, Gennaro said, and go back with Harding in his Jeep with Dr. Sadler. When they came to the land cruisers, Tim said, I want to ride in the front one this time with Dr. Grant. Malcolm said, unfortunately, Dr. Grant and I need to talk. Tell you what, Tim, Ed Regis said, let them sit in the rear car by themselves, we'll sit in the front car, and you can use the night vision goggles. They're goggles with very sensitive CCDs that allow you to see in the dark. Neat, Tim said, and moved toward the first car. Hey, Lex said, I want to use it too. No, Tim said. No fair, no fair. You get to do everything, Timmy. Ed Regis watched them go and said, I can see what the ride back is going to be like. You may want to turn off the radio between the cars. The button is here under the dashboard. The cars will drive back automatically. We should be there in about 20 minutes. Grant and Malcolm climbed into the second car. A few raindrops spattered the windshield. Let's get going, Ed Regis said. He ran to the first car and climbed aboard. With a soft electric whir, the Land Cruiser started off. Malcolm was explaining the chaos theory to Grant when the cars jolted to a stop. What's happened, Grant said. Up ahead, the kids were pointing toward the ocean. Offshore, beneath lowering clouds, Grant saw the dark shape of a supply boat making its way back to Punta Arenas. "Why have we stopped?" Malcolm said. Ed Regis climbed out of the front car and came running back to them. "I'm sorry," he said, "but the kids are all worked up. Do you have binoculars here?" "For what?" "The little girl says she sees something on the boat, some kind of animal." Grant grabbed the binoculars and scanned the long shape of the supply ship. Regis flipped on the radio.
"I can see them,"
Lex said impatiently.
"Near the back. Look near the back."
"How can she see anything in this light?" Malcolm said. "Kids can see," Grant said. "They've got visual acuity we forgot we ever had." He swung the binoculars toward the stern, moving them slowly, and suddenly he saw the animals. They were playing, darting among the silhouetted stern structures. He could only see them briefly, but even in the fading light he could tell that they were upright animals, about 2 feet tall, standing with stiff, balancing tails.
"You see them now?"
"I see them," he said.
"What are they?"
"They're raptors," Grant said. "At least 2, maybe more." "Jesus," Ed Regis said. "That boat's going to the mainland." Malcolm shrugged. "Don't get excited. Just call the control room and tell them to recall the boat." Ed Regis reached in and grabbed the radio from the dashboard. They heard hissing static. He ran off to the first land cruiser. They saw him duck into it, then he looked back at them. "There's something wrong with both the radios," he said. "I can't raise the control room." "Then let's get going," Grant said. Along the side of the road, clouds of volcanic steam misted rainbows in the bright quartz lights. Grant said into the radio, "How long does it take the ship to reach the mainland?"
18 hours,
Ed Regis said.
more or less. It should arrive around noon tomorrow.
Grant frowned. "We still can't talk to the control room?"
Not so far.
"How about Harding? Can you reach him?"
I've tried. He may have his radio turned off.
"How long until we get back to the base?"
From here, another 16, 17 minutes.
Ed Regis said. At night, the whole road was illuminated by big floodlights. It felt to Grant as if they were driving through a bright green tunnel of leaves. Large raindrops spattered the windshield. Grant felt the land cruiser slow, then stop. Now what? Lex said,
I don't want to stop. Why did we stop?
And then suddenly all the floodlights went out. The road was plunged into darkness. Lex said,
Hey! Probably just a power outage or something.
Ed Regis said.
And I'm sure the lights will be on in a minute.
What the hell? Arnold said, staring at his monitors. What happened? His control room partner Muldoon said. You lose power? Yeah, but only power on the perimeter. Everything in this building's working fine. But outside in the park, the power's gone. Lights, TV, cameras, everything. What about the 2 land cruisers? Stopped somewhere around the Tyrannosaur paddock. Well, Muldoon said, call maintenance and let's get the power back on. Arnold picked up one of his phones and heard hissing. Nedry's computers talking to each other. No phones. That damn Nedry. Nedry. Where the hell is he? Dennis Nedry pushed open the door marked Fertilization. With the perimeter power out, all the security locks were disarmed. Every door in the building opened with a touch. The problems with the security system were high on Jurassic Park's bug list. Nedry wondered if anybody ever imagined that it wasn't a bug, that Nedry had programmed it that way. He had built in a classic trap door. Nedry had become angry with the Jurassic Park project. Late in the schedule, InGen had demanded extensive modifications to the system, but hadn't been willing to pay for them, arguing they should be included under the original contract. Lawsuits were threatened. Letters were written to Nedry's other clients implying that Nedry was unreliable. It was blackmail, and in the end, Nedry was forced to eat his overages on Jurassic Park and make the changes that Hammond wanted. But later, when he was approached by Louis Dodgson at Biosyn, Nedry was ready to listen. He entered the fertilization room. The lab was deserted. As he anticipated, all the staff was at dinner. Nedry unzipped his shoulder bag and removed the can of Gillette shaving cream. He unscrewed the base and saw the interior was divided into a series of cylindrical slots. He pulled on a pair of heavy insulated gloves and opened the walk-in freezer. The embryos were arranged by species: Stegosaurus, Apatosaurus, Hadrosaurus, Tyrannosaurus. Each embryo in a thin glass container, wrapped in silver foil, stoppered with polyline. Nedry quickly took 2 of each, slipping them into the shaving cream can. Then he screwed the base of the can shut and twisted the top. There was a hiss of releasing gas inside, and the can frosted in his hands. Dodgson had said there was enough coolant to last 36 hours. More than enough time to get back to San Jose. Nedry left the freezer, returning to the main lab. He dropped the can back in his bag, zipped it shut. He went back into the hallway. The whole procedure had taken less than 2 minutes. He could imagine the consternation upstairs in the control room as they began to realize what had happened. All their security codes were scrambled and all their phone lines were jammed. Without his help, it would take hours to untangle the mess. But in just a few minutes, Nedry would be back in the control room, setting things right. And no one would ever suspect what he had done. Grinning, Dennis Nedry walked down to the ground floor, nodded to the guard, and continued downstairs to the basement. Passing the neat lines of electric Land Cruisers, he went to the gasoline-powered Jeep parked against the wall. He climbed into it, noticing some odd gray tubing on the passenger seat. It looked almost like a rocket launcher, he thought, as he turned the ignition key and started the Jeep. Nedry glanced at his watch. From here, 3 minutes to the East Dock, 3 minutes from there, back to the control room. Piece of cake. "Damn it," Arnold said, punching the buttons on the console. "It's all screwed up. We have real trouble." "What's that?" Muldoon said. "That idiot Nedry turned off the security systems," Arnold said. "The whole building's opened up. None of the doors are locked anymore." "I'll notify the guards," Muldoon said. "That's the least of it," Arnold said. "When you turn off the security, you turn off all the electrical fences as well. They're off, all over the island." "You mean—" "That's right," Arnold said. "The animals can get out now." Arnold lit a cigarette. "Probably nothing will happen, but you never know." Muldoon started toward the door. "I better drive out and bring in the people in those 2 Land Cruisers," he said. "I've got the launcher in the Jeep, just in case." Muldoon went quickly downstairs to the garage. He was worried about what the people in the cars would do. He didn't want them getting out of the Land Cruisers, because once the power came back on, the cars would start moving again, whether the people were inside them or not. They might be left behind. Of course, in the rain, it was unlikely they would leave the cars, but still, you never knew. He reached the garage and hurried toward the Jeep. It was lucky, he thought, that he had had the foresight to put weapons in it. He could start right out, and be out there and... It was gone. The Jeep was gone. What the hell was happening? Rain drummed loudly on the roof of the Land Cruiser. Tim felt the night vision goggles pressing heavily on his forehead. He reached for the knob near his ear, adjusting the intensity. There was a brief phosphorescent flare, and then in shades of electronic green and black, he could see the Land Cruiser behind with Dr. Grant and Dr. Malcolm inside. Neat! Dr. Grant was staring out the front windshield toward him. Tim saw him pick up the radio from the dash. There was a burst of static, and then he heard Dr. Grant's voice. "Can you see us back here?" Tim picked up the radio from Ed Regis. "I see you." "Everything all right?" "We're fine, Dr. Grant." "Stay in the car." "We will, don't worry." He clicked the radio off. Tim turned to look at the foliage at the side of the road. It would be amazing to see a tyrannosaur with these night vision goggles. A real thrill. Maybe the tyrannosaur would come to the fence and look over at them. Tim wondered if its eyes would glow in the dark when he saw them. That would be neat. But he didn't see anything, and eventually he stopped looking. Listening to the sound of the rain, Tim felt himself growing sleepy. He yawned and turned to look at the palm trees on the left side of the road, and was startled by a sudden thump as the ground shook. He swung back just in time to catch a glimpse of a dark shape as it swiftly crossed the road between the 2 cars. There was a sudden white crack of lightning, and Tim's night goggles flared bright green. Thunder crashed, deafeningly loud and very close. Lex began to cry. "Take it easy, honey," Ed Regis said. "It's just lightning." Tim scanned the side of the road. The rain was coming down hard now, shaking the leaves with the hammering drops. It made everything move. Everything seemed alive. He scanned the leaves. He stopped. There was something beyond the leaves. Tim looked up, higher. Behind the foliage, beyond the fence, he saw a thick body with a pebbled, grainy surface like the bark of a tree. But it wasn't a tree. He continued to look higher, sweeping the goggles upward. He saw the huge head of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, just standing there, looking over the fence at the 2 Land Cruisers. The lightning flashed again, and the big animal rolled its head and bellowed in the glaring light. The head was huge. The animal looked from one vehicle to another, then back again. It seemed to stare right at Tim. In the goggles, the eyes glowed bright green. "Jesus Christ," Ed Regis said, staring out the window. The Tyrannosaurus roared. It was terrifying, a scream from some other world. Ed Regis felt the spreading warmth in his trousers. He'd peed in his pants. He was simultaneously embarrassed and terrified, but he knew he had to do something. He couldn't just stay here. Tim heard the sound of the door opening, and he swung his head away from the Tyrannosaurus in time to see Ed Regis stepping out through the open door. He ran in the opposite direction from the Tyrannosaur, disappearing into the woods. The door to the Land Cruiser hung open. The paneling was getting wet. "He left," Lex said. "Where did he go? He left us alone." "Shut the door," Tim said. But she had started to scream, "He left us! He left us!"
Tim, what's going on?
It was Dr. Grant on the radio.
Tim.
The lightning flashed again. Tim blinked to recover his vision. When he looked again, the Tyrannosaur was standing there exactly as before, motionless and huge. Rain dripped from its jaws. Its forelimb gripped the fence. And then Tim realized the Tyrannosaur was holding on to the fence. The fence wasn't electrified anymore. "Lex, close the door!" But Lex was screaming, "He left us! He left us!" in a steady, monotonous wail, and there was nothing for Tim to do but climb out of the back door into the slashing rain and mud and shut the door for her. Thunder rumbled and the lightning flashed again. Tim looked up and saw the Tyrannosaur crashing down the cyclone fence with a giant hind limb. "Timmy!" He jumped back in and slammed the door, the sound lost in thunder.
Tim, are you there?
He grabbed the radio. "I'm here."
Stay in the car, stay down, be quiet, don't move, and don't make noise.
"Okay,
Just stay quiet so you don't arouse its attention any more than necessary.
okay." Tim clicked the radio off. "You hear that, Lex?" The Tyrannosaur roared. In the glare of the lightning, they saw it pull free of the fence and take a bounding step forward. Now it was standing between the two cars. Tim couldn't see Dr. Grant's car anymore because the huge body blocked his view. The Tyrannosaur moved forward around the side of their car. It went to the very spot where Tim had gotten out of the car, where Ed Regis had gotten out of the car. The animal paused there. The big head ducked down toward the mud. The huge head swung back up, jaws open, and then stopped by the side windows. In the glare of lightning, they saw the beady, expressionless reptile eye moving in the socket. It was looking in the car. "Timmy," Lex whispered. "It's okay," Tim whispered. "I don't think it saw us." He was looking back toward Dr. Grant when a jolting impact rocked the Land Cruiser and shattered the windshield in a spider web as the Tyrannosaur's head crashed against the hood of the Land Cruiser. Tim was knocked flat on the seat. The night vision goggles slid off his forehead. He got back up quickly, blinking in the darkness. His mouth was warm with blood. "Lex!" He couldn't see his sister anywhere. Then he heard her groan. She was lying somewhere on the floor under the front seat. The Tyrannosaur roared, and suddenly the metal roof dented downward. Tim felt a sharp pain in his head and tumbled to the floor onto the transmission hump. He found himself alongside Lex and was shocked to see that the whole side of her head was covered in blood. She looked unconscious. There was another jolting impact, and pieces of glass fell around him. He felt rain. He looked up and saw the front windshield had broken out. There was just a jagged rim of glass, and beyond, the big head of the dinosaur, looking down at him. Tim felt a sudden chill, and then the head rushed forward toward him, the jaws open. There was the squeal of metal against teeth, and he felt the hot, stinking breath of the animal, and a thick tongue stuck into the car through the windshield opening. The tongue slapped wetly around inside the car. He felt the hot lather of dinosaur saliva, and the Tyrannosaur roared, a deafening sound inside the car. And the head pulled away abruptly. Tim scrambled up, avoiding the dent in the roof. There was still room to sit on the front seat by the passenger door. The Tyrannosaur stood in the rain by the front fender. It seemed confused by what had happened to it. Blood dripped freely from its jaws. The Tyrannosaur looked at Tim, cocking its head to stare with one big eye. The head moved close to the car sideways and peered in. Blood splattered on the dented hood of the Land Cruiser, mixing with the rain. "It can't get to me," Tim thought. "It's too big." Then the head pulled away, and in the flare of lightning he saw the big hind leg lift up. and the world tilted crazily as the Land Cruiser slammed over on its side, the windows splatting in the mud. He saw Lex fall helplessly against the side window, and he fell down beside her, banging his head. Tim felt dizzy. Then the Tyrannosaur's jaws clamped onto the window frame, and the whole Land Cruiser was lifted up into the air and shaken. In the next instant, everything swung crazily, and then, with a metallic scraping shriek, the car fell from the Tyrannosaur's jaws, a sickening fall, and Tim's stomach heaved in the moment before the world became totally black and silent. In the other car, Malcolm gasped, "Jesus, what happened to the car?" Grant blinked his eyes as the lightning faded. The other car was gone. "What happened?" Malcolm said. "I don't know." The dinosaur was standing in darkness on the road up ahead, but they could see well enough to know that it was bending over now, sniffing the ground. Or eating something on the ground. "Do you, have any suggestions about what we do now?" Malcolm asked. "I can't think of a thing," Grant said. Malcolm twisted the handle, kicked open the door, and ran. But even as he did, Grant could see he was too late. The Tyrannosaur too close. There was another crack of lightning, and in that instant of glaring white light, Grant watched in horror as the Tyrannosaur saw him, roared, and leapt forward. Grant was not clear about exactly what happened next. Malcolm was running, his feet splashing in the mud. The Tyrannosaur bounded alongside him and ducked its massive head, and Malcolm was tossed into the air like a small doll. The Tyrannosaur bellowed angrily, and then the big hind leg came up and crashed down on the roof of the car. Grant felt searing pain and the surprising sensation of his body flying through the air. It seemed to be happening very slowly, and he had plenty of time to feel the world turn colder and watch the ground rush up to strike him in the face. Dennis Nedry hunched forward over the steering wheel, peering through the rain-slashed windshield as he drove the Jeep down the narrow road. He was driving fast, too fast, but he had to keep to his timetable. This damn storm, he thought, it might screw up everything, because if Dodgson's boat wasn't waiting for him at the east dock when Nedry got there, the whole plan would be ruined. Nedry couldn't wait very long, or he would be missed back at the control room. He was driving fast, and he'd already been gone 5 minutes. Where was the damned beach? He should have reached the dock by now, had he taken a wrong turn. It was a shock when he came around a corner and saw that the road terminated in a gray concrete barrier, 6 feet tall and streaked dark with rain. He slammed on the brakes and the Jeep slid to a stop, the headlights just a foot from the concrete wall. He got out. It was a real tropical storm, raining so hard that it hurt. He walked around the concrete barrier, and on the other side, along with the rain, he heard the sound of gurgling water. Could it be the ocean? Nedry hurried forward, his eyes adjusting to the darkness as he went. Dense jungle on all sides. The gurgling sound became louder, drawing him forward, and suddenly he came out of the foliage and felt his feet sink into the soft earth and saw the dark currents of the river. The river. He was at the jungle river. Damn, he thought. At the river where? The river ran for miles through the island. Nedry started back, heading toward the faint glow of the car's headlights. He heard a crashing sound in the underbrush, then silence. He waited, and heard it again. It sounded distinctly like something big, moving slowly through the jungle toward him. Get out of here. Nedry began to run. He made a lot of noise as he ran, but even so he could hear the animal crashing through the foliage, and making a soft hooting noise as it came closer. Stumbling over tree roots in the darkness, clawing his way past dripping branches, he saw the Jeep ahead. In a moment he'd be in the car, and then he'd get the hell out of here. He scrambled around the barrier, and then he froze. The animal was already there. But it wasn't close. The dinosaur stood 40 feet away, at the edge of the illumination from the Jeep's headlamps. Its 10-foot-tall body was yellow with black spots, and along the head ran a pair of red V-shaped crests. The dinosaur didn't move, but again gave its soft hooting cry. The dinosaur stared at him, and then snapped its head in a single swift motion. Nedry felt something smack wetly against his face. He wiped it away with his hand and stared at a dripping glob of foam. He touched it curiously, not comprehending. It was spit. The dinosaur had spit on him. Jesus, it was disgusting. But worse, his skin was starting to burn. It was almost like he had been touched with acid. He felt a sudden, excruciating pain in his eyes, stabbing like spikes into the back of his skull. He squeezed his eyes shut and gasped with the intensity of it and threw up his hands to cover his eyes and felt the slippery foam trickling down both sides of his nose. The pain overwhelmed him, and he dropped to his knees. Disoriented, wheezing, he collapsed onto his side. The earth shook beneath him, and Nedry knew the dinosaur was moving. He could hear its soft hooting cry, and despite the pain, he forced his eyes open, and still he saw nothing but flashing spots against black. Slowly the realization came to him. He was blind. The dinosaur was close now. He could feel it coming close. He was dimly aware of its snorting breath, but he couldn't see. He couldn't see anything, and his terror was extreme. He stretched out his hands, waving them wildly in the air to ward off the attack he knew was coming. And then there was a new, searing pain like a fiery knife in his belly. Nedry stumbled, reaching blindly down to touch the ragged edge of his shirt, and then a thick, slippery mass that was surprisingly warm, and with horror he suddenly knew he was holding his own intestines in his hands. The dinosaur had torn him open. His guts had fallen out. Nedry fell to the ground and landed on something scaly and cold. It was the animal's foot. And then there was new pain on both sides of his head. The pain grew worse, and as he was lifted to his feet, he knew the dinosaur had his head in its jaws, and the horror of that realization was followed by a final wish, that it would all be ended soon.
When Tim Murphy came to in the Land Cruiser, he discovered that the vehicle was lying on its side in the branches of a large tree 20 feet above the ground. The branches were bending under the weight of the car, and the car would fall at any moment. He scrambled down to safety just as the Land Cruiser tumbled down with a loud crash and a burst of electrical sparks. He found the night goggles and began looking for Lex, Dr. Grant, and Malcolm. The other Land Cruiser was turned on its side and was empty. Dr. Harding's sedated Stegosaurus had awakened and came around to investigate, but Tim was able to scare it away by pelting it with rocks. He finally found Lex inside a drainage pipe that ran under the road. There was dried blood in her scalp and on her forehead, but she seemed unhurt, and he felt great relief that he had found her. Lex called out for Dr. Grant, and Tim was afraid her shouts might bring back the Tyrannosaurus, but a moment later they heard an answering call, and Dr. Grant came walking toward them. He had a claw abrasion down the right side of his chest where the Tyrannosaurus had kicked him. Grant suspected that Tim's nose was broken, and the boy's right shoulder was swollen. But the important thing was that they could all walk. They started out in the direction of the lodge. At the bottom of the first hill they spotted Ed Regis, pressed up against the trunk of a big tree. Into his path stepped a juvenile Tyrannosaurus, about 8 feet tall. The young animal seemed more interested in playing rough with Regis than eating him. It would lunge at him, knock him down, allow him to get to his feet, then lunge at him again. At one point, the game became too much for Regis, and he began to scream. The juvenile T-Rex bent down, and the scream ended abruptly. When the juvenile's head came back up, Grant saw ragged flesh in its jaws. Grant grabbed the children's hands, and they ran off. After an hour of exhausted wandering in the dark, they came across a maintenance shed fitted with iron bars. It was a tight squeeze, but Grant was able to ease his body through, and he pulled in Tim and Lex. They collapsed onto bales of hay and fell asleep. Ellie, Harding, and Gennaro made it back safely to the visitors' center, since Harding drove a gasoline-engine Jeep, not a Land Cruiser. Gennaro left with Muldoon on a search for Grant, the kids, Malcolm, and Regis. Their first grisly find was a severed leg. Muldoon identified the shoe as the kind Regis wore. Then they came upon the wrecks of the Land Cruisers and correctly guessed that the Tyrannosaurus had caused the destruction. Muldoon knew that children were the preferred victims of predators like the T-Rex. A Tyrannosaurus could kill a child just by shaking it, snapping the neck. So he thought it unlikely that they would ever find any remains of the children. But when Gennaro found 3 sets of footprints, 2 small and 1 large, they had renewed hope. They heard a wheezing noise and found Malcolm hidden inside the fronds of a palm tree. His trousers were soaked in blood, a bone was sticking through the flesh, and Malcolm had used his belt as a tourniquet. Muldoon and Gennaro raced Malcolm back to the lodge for medical treatment, only to find that the phone lines were down. No doctor could be called. so Ellie set about doing the best she could. It fell to Gennaro to tell Hammond that his grandchildren were missing, but the old man was surprisingly calm. He was sure that once the computers were functioning, Muldoon would find the kids, and the regrettable, unfortunate accident would be cleared up. Since Nedry had still not surfaced, Arnold and Wu deduced that he was the one who had sabotaged the computer system. But how to get it working again? Nedry was the acknowledged brains behind it. They knew so little, and Malcolm was too delirious with pain to give them any assistance. But finally, shortly after dawn, there was a breakthrough. The big quartz lights began coming on throughout the park. The motion sensors started working again. Arnold was confident that in another hour or two, they would again be in control of Jurassic Park.
Grant was awakened by a low grinding sound, followed by a mechanical clanking. He opened his eyes and saw a bale of hay rolling past him on a conveyor belt, up toward the ceiling. The power was on again. Grant stood slowly and looked around. On the wall he saw a gray metal box and a stenciled sign, Sauropod Maintenance Building. He opened the box and saw a telephone, but when he lifted the receiver he heard only hissing static. Apparently the phones weren't working yet. Grant walked around the corner and found Lex by the bars. It was growing lighter every minute. He should go outside, he thought, and set off one of the motion sensors on the field above. After all, it might take the people in the control room an hour to get out here to him, and he didn't like the idea that the phones were still down. Tim came out of the shadows of the building. "Look what I found," he said. He held out a set of plans, detailed topographical charts for the main area of the island, where they now were. According to this, they were near a lagoon that narrowed into the river, which twisted northward through an area labeled Aviary, and on to within half-mile of the visitor lodge. How to get to the lagoon? According to the plans, there should be a door at the back of the building they were in. Grant looked up and saw it, recessed back in the concrete wall. Opening it, he saw a paved road running straight down toward the lagoon. The road was dug below ground level, so it couldn't be seen from above. It must be another service road, and it led to a dock at the edge of the lagoon. And clearly stenciled on the dock was raft storage. "Hey," Tim said, "look at this." He held out a metal case to Grant. Inside were a compressed air pistol and a cloth belt which held 6 darts. "Is it a tranquilizer gun?" Tim asked. "I'd say so." Grant called Lex over, and the three of them stepped outside and started down the road. "I hope it's a big raft," Lex said, "because I can't swim." As they walked, they heard a deep, rhythmic snoring sound, but could not see where it was coming from. They heard a steady, droning, buzzing sound, too. When they reached the end of the road at the edge of the small concrete dock, Grant froze in shock. The Tyrannosaurus was right there. It was sitting upright in the shade of a tree, its hind legs stretched out in front. Its eyes were open, but it was not moving, except for its head, which lifted and fell gently with each snorting sound. The buzzing came from the clouds of flies which surrounded it, crawling over its face in slack jaws, its bloody fangs, and the red haunch of a killed hadrosaur that lay on its side behind it. The Tyrannosaur was only 20 yards away. Grant felt sure it must have seen him, but the big animal did not respond. It just sat there. It took him a moment to realize the Tyrannosaur was asleep, sitting up, but asleep. He signaled to Tim and Lex to stay where they were. Grant walked slowly forward onto the dock, in full view of the Tyrannosaur. Near the end of the dock, a wooden shed was painted green to blend with the foliage. Grant quietly unlatched the door and dragged a rubber raft across the dock. It flopped into the water with a loud splash. The dinosaur continued to sleep. He tied the raft up to the dock and returned to the shed to take out paddles and 2 life preservers. He put these in the boat, and then waved for the kids to come out onto the dock. They got in, put on their life vests, and Grant got in and pushed off. The raft drifted silently out into the lagoon. Grant picked up the paddles and fitted them into the oar locks. They moved farther from the dock. Lex sat back and sighed loudly with relief. Then she looked stricken and put her hand over her mouth. Her body shook with muffled sounds. She was suppressing a cough. "Lex," Tim whispered fiercely, looking back toward the shore. She shook her head miserably and pointed to her throat. What she needed was a drink of water. Grant was rowing, and Tim leaned over the side of the raft and scooped his hand in the lagoon, holding his cupped hand toward her. Lex coughed loudly, explosively. The sound echoed across the water like a gunshot. The tyrannosaur yawned lazily, then scratched behind its ear with its hind foot, just like a dog. It was waking up slowly. On the boat, Lex was making little gargling sounds. "I can't help it," she whispered, and then she coughed again. On the shore, the tyrannosaur stumbled to its feet. "Lex!" Grant was rowing as fast as he could. "It doesn't matter," she said. "We're far enough away. He can't swim." "Of course he can swim, you little idiot!" Tim shouted at her. On the shore, the tyrannosaur stepped off the dock and plunged into the water. It moved strongly into the lagoon after them. "Well, how should I know?" she said. The tyrannosaur was gaining on them. Grant could hear its sharp, snorting breaths as it came closer. The tyrannosaur threw its head back and opened its jaws wide, showing rows of curved teeth, and then in a great muscular spasm lunged forward to the raft, just missing the rubber gunwale, the huge skull slapping down, the raft rocking away on the crest of the splash. The tyrannosaur sank below the surface, leaving gurgling bubbles. "Hang on," Grant shouted as the head bucked up beneath the rubber, bending the boat and lifting it into the air, spinning them crazily before it splashed down again. "Do something," Lexus screamed. "Do something!" Suddenly they heard a roar floating across the water toward them. Grant saw the juvenile T-Rex on the shore, crouched over the carcass of the killed sauropod, claiming it as its own. The juvenile slashed at the carcass, then raised its head high and bellowed. The big tyrannosaur saw it too, and the response was immediate. It turned back to protect its kill, swimming strongly toward the shore. "He's going away," Lex squealed, clapping her hands. Exhausted from rowing, Grant collapsed back, his chest heaving. He looked at his watch and was astonished to see that only 15 minutes had passed since he had awakened. It seemed like 2 hours. "I just don't understand," John Arnold said, speaking into the phone. "I don't see the Rex, and I don't see Grant and the kids anywhere either." He sat in front of the consoles and gulped another cup of coffee. All around him, the control room was strewn with paper plates and half-eaten sandwiches. Arnold was exhausted. It was 8 a.m. In the 14 hours since Nedry destroyed the computer that ran Jurassic Park, Arnold had patiently pulled systems back online, one after another. "All the park systems are back and functioning correctly. The phones are working. I've called a doctor for you." On the other end of the line, Malcolm coughed. Arnold was talking to him in his room at the lodge. "But you're having trouble with the motion sensors?" Malcolm asked. "Well, I'm not finding what I'm looking for." "Like the Rex?" "He's not reading at all now," Arnold said. "He started north about 20 minutes ago, following along the edge of the lagoon, and then I lost him. I don't know why, unless he's gone to sleep again." "And you can't find Grant and the kids?" "No." "I think it's quite simple," Malcolm said. "The motion sensors cover an inadequate area." "Inadequate," Arnold bristled. "They cover 92% of the land area. I remember," Malcolm said. "But Grant's no fool. He clearly wants to be detected by you. He and the kids are probably waving at every motion sensor in sight. But maybe they have other problems we don't know about. Or maybe they're on the river. Would the river bring them all the way back here?" "Yes, but it's not the safest way to go. It passes through the aviary. We've got 4 dactyls there now. Actually, they're pterodactyls, which are big fish-eating dactyls." "What about them?" "Well, while we finished the lodge, we put the dactyls in the aviary to acclimate them. But that was a big mistake. It turns out our fish-eaters are fiercely territorial. They fight among themselves for territory, and they'll attack any other animal that comes into the area they've marked out." "Attack?" "It's impressive," Arnold said. "The dactyls glide to the top of the aviary, fold up their wings, and dive. A 30-pound animal will strike a man on the ground like a ton of bricks. They were knocking the workmen unconscious, cutting them up pretty badly." "So if those kids are in the aviary—" "I hope they're not," Arnold said. "Is that the lodge?" Lex said. "What a dump." Beneath the aviary dome, Terratop's Visitor Lodge was built high above the ground on big wooden pylons in the middle of a stand of fir trees. But the building was unfinished and unpainted, the windows boarded up. The trees in the lodge were splattered with broad white streaks. "I guess they didn't finish it for some reason," Grant said, hiding his disappointment. There was a distinctive sour odor in the morning air. "Stinks here," Lex said. "What's all the white stuff?" "Looks like reptile droppings, probably from the birds." Grant looked up and saw an enormous dark shape gliding above them, blotting out the sun. It was a pterodactyl. He was entranced by the sight of the huge flying creature. In the sky above, the pterodactyl gave a low whistle and wheeled gracefully toward them. "How come they're not on the tour?" Tim said. Grant was wondering the same thing. The flying dinosaurs were so beautiful, so graceful as they moved through the air. As Grant watched, he saw a second pterodactyl appear in the sky, and a third and a fourth. Grant was thinking, these weren't ordinary pterodactyls. They were too large. When they came lower, he could see the animals had 15-foot wingspans, furry bodies, and heads like a crocodile. Lex shaded her eyes and looked up to the sky. "Can they hurt us?" "I don't think so. They eat fish." One of the dactyls spiraled down, a flashing dark shadow that whooshed past them with a rush of warm air and a lingering sour odor. "Wow," Lex said. "They're really big." And then she said, "Are you sure they can't hurt us?" "Pretty sure." A second dactyl swooped down, moving faster than the first. "Ow!" Lex shouted, grabbing her hair. "He bit me!" "He what?" Grant said. "He bit me! He bit me!" And when she took her hand away, he saw blood on her fingers. Up in the sky, two more dactyls folded their wings, collapsing into small dark shapes that plummeted toward the ground. They made a kind of scream as they hurtled downward. Grant felt claws tear the shirt along his back. Lex was screaming, waving her arms wildly. Tim shouted at the top of his lungs. The dactyl swooped down again. Lex threw something, and one of the dactyls grabbed it. Suddenly, the dactyl whistled and climbed. The other dactyls immediately climbed and chased the first into the sky. Grant looked upward, squinting. "What happened?" he said. "They got my glove," Lex said. "My Darryl Strawberry special. I hope they choke and die." "Yeah," Tim said. "Me too." The Jeep bounced along in the glaring sun. Muldoon was driving with Gennaro at his side. Gennaro stared at the landscape shimmering in the morning heat. Then he looked down at the onboard computer and video monitor mounted in the dashboard. The monitor showed views of the park from remote cameras. Still no sign of Grant and the children, or of the Tyrannosaur. The radio crackled. "Muldoon." Muldoon picked up the handset. "Yeah?" "I found the Rex. He's in grid 442. Going to 443. "Just a minute," Muldoon said, adjusting the monitor. "Yeah, I got him now. Following the river." The animal was slinking along the foliage that lined the banks of the river going north. "Take it easy with him. Just immobilize him." "Don't worry," Muldoon said, squinting in the sun. "I won't hurt him." "Remember," Arnold said, "the Tyrannosaur is our main tourist attraction." Muldoon turned off his radio with a crackle of static. "Bloody fool," he said. "They're still talking about tourists. Let's go see Rexy and give him a dose." The Tyrannosaur was poking its head through the branches, peering toward the river, trying to get through. Then the animal moved a few yards downstream to try again. "Wonder what he sees in there," Gennaro said. "Hard to know," Muldoon said. "Maybe he's trying to get to the microceratops that scramble around in the branches. They'll run him a merry chase." Muldoon stopped the Jeep about 50 yards away from the Tyrannosaur and turned the vehicle around. He left the motor running. "Get behind the wheel," Muldoon said, "and put your seatbelt on." He took a canister and hooked it onto his shirt. Then he got out with his tranquilizer gun, walked 10 yards behind the Jeep, and crouched down in the grass on one knee. He steadied the big gun against his shoulder and flipped up the thick telescopic sight. Muldoon aimed at the Tyrannosaur, which still ignored them. There was a burst of pale gas, and Gennaro saw a white streak shoot forward in the air toward the Tyrannosaur, but nothing seemed to happen. Then the Tyrannosaur turned slowly, curiously, to peer at them. Muldoon had taken down the launcher and was loading the second canister. "You hit him?" Gennaro said. Muldoon shook his head. "Missed. Damn laser sights." On the radio he heard a voice say,
"Muldoon, this is Arnold. Get out of there. Over."
"I know what I'm doing," Muldoon said. The Tyrannosaur charged. Muldoon stood his ground. Despite the creature racing toward him, he slowly and methodically raised his launcher, aimed, and fired. Once again, Gennaro saw the puff of smoke and the white streak of the canister going toward the animal. Nothing happened. The Tyrannosaur continued to charge. Now Muldoon was on his feet and running, shouting, "Go! Go!" Gennaro put the Jeep in gear, and Muldoon threw himself onto the side door as the Jeep lurched forward. Gennaro floored it, heading for a stand of trees to the left, until in the rearview mirror he saw the Tyrannosaur give a final roar and turn away. Muldoon was shaking his head. "I could have sworn I hit him the second time." "I'd say you missed," Gennaro said. Muldoon picked up the radio. "Control?"
"Yes?"
Arnold said. "We're heading back to base." The river was now very narrow and flowing swiftly. The raft was going faster all the time. It was starting to feel like an amusement park ride. "Whee!" Lex yelled. "Faster! Faster!" Further ahead, Grant could see that the trees ended, and there was bright sunlight beyond, and a distant roaring sound. Grant grabbed for the paddles. "What is it?" Tim asked. "It's a waterfall," Grant said. The raft swept out of the overhanging darkness into brilliant morning sunlight and raced forward on the swift current toward the lip of the waterfall. The roar was loud in their ears. Grant paddled as strongly as he could, but he only succeeded in spinning the boat in circles. It continued inexorably toward the lip. Lex leaned toward him. "I can't swim." Grant saw she did not have her life vest clasped, but there was nothing he could do about it. With frightening speed they came to the edge, and the roar of the waterfall seemed to fill the world. Grant jammed his oar deep into the water, felt it catch and hold, right at the lip. The rubber raft shuddered in the current, but they did not go over. Grant strained against the oar and, looking over the edge, saw the sheer drop of 50 feet down to the surging pool below. And standing in the surging pool, waiting for them, was the Tyrannosaur. Lex was screaming in panic, and then the boat spun, and the rear end dropped away, spilling them out into the air and roaring water, and they fell sickeningly. Grant flailed his arms in the air, and the world went suddenly silent and slow. It seemed to him he fell for long minutes. Then, with a stinging slap, Grant plunged into cold water. He swam for the shore, clutched warm rocks, slipped off, caught a branch, and finally pulled himself out of the main current. Then he saw Tim battling with the current, and he reached out and pulled him, coughing and shivering, onto the shore beside him. Grant turned back to the waterfall and saw the Tyrannosaur plunge its head straight down into the water. The great head shook, splashing water to either side. It had something between its teeth. And then the Tyrannosaur lifted its head back up. Dangling from its jaws was Lex's orange life vest. A moment later, Lex bobbed to the surface beside the dinosaur's long tail. She lay face down in the water. Grant plunged into the water after her, again immersed in the churning torrent. A moment later, he pulled her up onto the rocks, a heavy, lifeless weight. Grant bent over to give her mouth-to-mouth, but she coughed. Then she vomited yellow-green liquid and coughed again. Her eyelids fluttered. "Hi," she said. She smiled weakly. "We did it." Tim started to cry. "We were worried about you," Grant said. The Tyrannosaur was tearing up the life vest. It was still turned away from them, facing the waterfall, but at any minute it might turn and see them. Grant saw a dirt path by the river. It seemed to lead up toward the waterfall. "Come on, kids," he said. Cautiously, he led them upstream. "Where are we going?" Lex said. "We're going back." "I know." The path seemed to lead right into the rushing water, but as they came closer, they saw that it actually went behind the waterfall. The Tyrannosaur began looking for them downstream, its back turned to them. They were completely behind the waterfall now. Grant looked around in surprise. There was a little recess here, hardly larger than a closet, and filled with Park machinery. That meant there must be electricity to run it, so perhaps there was also a telephone for communication. He poked among the filters and pipes. "What are you doing?" Lex shouted. "Looking for a telephone." It was now nearly 10 a.m. They had just a little more than an hour to contact the ship before it reached the mainland. In the bank of the recess he found a metal door marked Maintenance 4, but it was firmly locked. Next to it was a metal box. Opening the box, he found a 9-button keypad. Scratched inside the box was the number 1023. He punched it in. With a hiss, the door came open. Gaping darkness beyond, concrete steps leading downward. On the back wall he saw stenciled Maintenance Vehicle 4 Charger, and an arrow pointing down the stairs. Could it really mean there was a car? "Stay here, kids. I'll be right back." "Where are you going?" Lex said, suddenly alarmed. Grant stepped through the door. The door gave an electronic beep and snapped shut behind him on a spring. Grant was plunged into total darkness. After a moment of surprise, he turned to the door and felt its damp surface. There was no knob, no latch. He turned to the walls on either side of the door, feeling for a switch, a control box, anything at all. There was nothing. He was fighting panic when his fingers closed over a cold metal cylinder. He ran his hands over a swelling edge, a flat surface. A flashlight! He clicked it on, and the beam was surprisingly bright. He looked back at the door, but saw that it would not open. He would have to wait for the kids to unlock it. Meantime, he started for the steps. Partway down the stairs, he heard a sniffing and the sound of claws scratching on concrete. He took out his dart pistol and proceeded cautiously. A moment later, he saw it. A car. It was an electric car, like a golf cart, and it faced a long tunnel that seemed to stretch away for miles. A bright red light glowed by the steering wheel of the car, so perhaps it was charged. Grant heard the sniffing again, and he wheeled and saw a pale shape rise up toward him, leaping through the air, its jaws open, and without thinking, Grant fired. The animal landed on him, knocking him down, and he rolled away in fright, his flashlight swinging wildly. But the animal didn't get up, and he felt foolish when he saw it. It was a velociraptor, but very young, less than a year old. It was about 2 feet tall, the size of a medium dog, and it lay on the ground, breathing shallowly, the dart sticking from beneath its jaw. There was probably too much anesthetic for body weight, and Grant pulled the dart out quickly. The velociraptor looked at him with slightly glazed eyes. Grant had a clear feeling of intelligence from this creature, a kind of softness which contrasted strangely with the menace he had felt from the adults in the pen. He stroked the head of the velociraptor, hoping to calm it. He looked down at the body, which was shivering slightly as the tranquilizer took hold, and then he saw it was a male. A young juvenile and a male. There was no question what he was seeing. This velociraptor had been bred in the wild. Excited by this development, he hurried back up the stairs to the door. It slowly dawned on him that he was locked inside, and unable to open it unless the kids had the presence of mind to open it for him. He could hear them faintly on the other side of the door. "Dr. Grant!" Lex shouted, pounding the door. "Dr. Grant!" "Take it easy," Tim said. "He'll be back." "But where did he go?" "Listen, Dr. Grant knows what he's doing," Tim said. "He'll be back in a minute." And then, with a roar, the Tyrannosaur's head burst through the waterfall toward them. Tim stared in terror as the big mouth gaped wide. Lex shrieked and threw herself on the ground. The head swung back and forth and pulled out again. Tim pulled Lex deeper into the recess, just as the jaws burst through again, roaring, the thick tongue flicking in and out rapidly. The recess was only a few feet deep and crammed with machinery. There wasn't any place for them to hide. The head came through the water again, but slowly this time, and the jaw came to rest on the ground. With a low growl, the jaws slowly opened and the tongue snaked out, moving slowly to the left, then to the right, slapping wetly against the machinery. The tip curled around the pipes and valves, sensing them. It dragged against Lex's legs. "Ew," Lex said. The tongue stopped. It curled like a snake up the side of her body. "Don't move," Tim whispered. Past her face, then up along Tim's shoulder, and finally wrapping around his head. Tim squeezed his eyes shut as the slimy muscle covered his face. It was hot and wet, and it stunk like urine. Wrapped around him, the tongue began to drag him very slowly toward the open jaws. "Timmy!" Tim couldn't answer. His mouth was covered by the flat black tongue. He could see, but he couldn't talk. The tongue dragged him toward the snorting mouth. Lex was tugging at him, but she was no match for the muscular power that held him. Tim let go of her and pressed the tongue with both hands, trying to shove it over his head. But he couldn't move it. He dug his heels into the muddy ground, but he was dragged forward anyway. Lex had wrapped her arms around his waist and was pulling backward, shouting to him, but he was powerless to do anything. He was beginning to see stars. A kind of peacefulness overcame him, a peaceful inevitability as he was dragged along. And then suddenly the tongue relaxed and uncoiled. He felt it slipping off his face. His body was covered in disgusting white foamy slime, and the tongue fell limply to the ground. The jaws slapped shut, biting down on the tongue. Dark blood gushed out, mixing with the mud. The nostrils still snorted in ragged breaths. "What's he doing?" Lex cried. And then slowly, very slowly, the head began to slide backward, out of the recess, leaving a long scrape in the mud. And finally it disappeared entirely, and they could see only the silver sheet of falling water. "Okay," Arnold said in the control room. "The Rex is down." "Son of a bitch," Muldoon said, looking at the monitor. "I got him after all." He turned to Gennaro. "It just took him an hour to feel it." Henry Wu frowned at the screen. "But he could drown in that position." "He won't drown," Muldoon said. "That's a valuable animal," Wu said. "I know it's a valuable animal," Muldoon said. Arnold turned to Gennaro. He couldn't resist a moment of triumph. "I'd point out to you," he said, "that the park is now completely back to normal. Whatever Malcolm's mathematical models said was going to happen, we are completely under control again." Gennaro pointed to the screen behind Arnold's head and said, "What's that?" Arnold turned. It was the system status box in the upper corner of the screen. Ordinarily it was empty. Arnold was surprised to see that it was now blinking yellow. "Auxiliary power low." "Henry," Arnold said to Wu, "look at this." Wu said, "Why are you running on auxiliary power?" "I'm not," Arnold said. "It looks like you are." "I can't be." "Print the system status log," Wu said. The log was a record of the system over the last few hours. Arnold pressed a button, and they heard the hum of a printer in the corner. Wu walked over to it. Arnold stared at the screen. The box now turned from flashing yellow to red, and the message now read, "Auxiliary power failure." Numbers began to count backward from 20. "What the hell's going on?" Arnold said. Cautiously, Tim moved a few yards out along the muddy path into the sunshine. He peered around the waterfall, and he saw the tyrannosaur lying on its side, floating in the pool of water below. "I hope he's dead," Lex said. Tim could see he wasn't. The dinosaur's chest was still moving. But something was wrong with him. Tim saw the white canister sticking in the back of the head. "He's been shot with a dart," Tim said. Then the sound of the waterfall changed. From a deafening roar it became softer, quieter. The thundering sheet of water thinned, became a trickle, and stopped. "Timmy, the waterfall stopped," Lex said. "It must be the power," Tim said. "Somebody turned off the power." Behind them, all the pumps and filters were shutting down one after another, the lights blinking off and the machinery becoming quiet. And then there was a thunk, and the door marked Maintenance 4 swung slowly open. Grant stepped out, blinking in the light, and said, "Good work, kids, you got the door open." "We didn't do anything," Lex said. "The power went out," said Tim. "Never mind that," Grant said. "Come and see what I've found." Arnold stared in shock. One after another, the monitors went black, and then the room lights went out, plunging the control room into darkness and confusion. Everyone started yelling at once. Muldoon opened the blinds and let light in, and Wu brought over the printout. "Look at this," Wu said. "When you powered back up this morning, only the auxiliary power came on." "Jesus," Arnold said. What does this line mean? Muldoon said, pointing. It means a system status warning was sent to the monitors in the control room, Arnold said, concerning the fences. Did you see that warning? Arnold shook his head. No, I must have been talking to you in the field. Anyway, no, I didn't see it. What does it mean, warning fence status? Well, I didn't know it at the time, but we were running on backup power, Arnold said, and backup doesn't generate enough amperage to power the electrified fences, so they were automatically kept off. Muldoon scowled. The electrified fences were off? Yes. All of them, since 5 a.m. this morning, for the last 5 hours? Yes. Including the velociraptor fences? Arnold sighed. Yes. Jesus Christ, Muldoon said. 5 hours. Those animals could be out. And then, from somewhere in the distance, they heard a scream. Muldoon began to talk very fast. He went around the room, handing out the portable radios. Mr. Arnold is going to the maintenance room to turn on main power. Dr. Wu, stay in the control room. You're the only other one who can work the computers. Mr. Hammond, go back to the lodge. Don't argue with me. Go now. Lock the gates and stay behind them until you hear from me. I'll help Arnold deal with the raptors. He turned to Gennaro. Ready to live dangerously again? Not really, Gennaro said. He was very pale. Muldoon turned away. That's it, everybody. Now move. Hammond whined, But what are you going to do to my animals? That's not really the question, Mr. Hammond, Muldoon said. The question is, what are they going to do to us? Its electric motor whirring, the cart raced forward down the dark underground tunnel. Grant drove, his foot to the floor. Sitting beside him in the cart, Lex shone the flashlight to the back, where the velociraptor lay. Why is it having trouble breathing? Because I shot it with tranquilizer, he said. Why are we taking it? Lex said. To prove to the people back at the center that the dinosaurs are really breeding, Grant said. How do you know they're breeding? Because this one's young, Grant said, and because, it's a boy dinosaur. Is it? Lex said, peering along the flashlight beam. Yes. Now shine that light forward, will you? He held out his wrist, turning the watch to her. What does it say? It says 10:15. Tim said, That means we have only 45 minutes to contact the boat. We should be close, Grant said. I figure we should be almost to the visitor center right now. They burst out into daylight with shocking speed. A building loomed directly above them. Grant saw at once that it was the visitor center. They had arrived right in front of the garage. Grant parked the cart in the garage. Along one wall were stacked animal cages. They put the velociraptor in one with a dish of water. Then they started climbing the stairs up to the ground floor entrance of the visitor center. And they fell silent. The glass doors had been shattered. The guard was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, his body torn to pieces. Grant told Lex not to look as he crawled around to unclip the radio from the guard's belt. Hello, this is Grant. Hello. The radio crackled.
My God,
came a voice.
Grant, is that you?
And then,
Alan. Alan?
It was Ellie. I'm here, Grant said.
Thank God.
Ellie said.
Are you all right?
I'm all right, yes.
What about the kids? Have you seen them?
I have the kids with me, Grant said. They're okay. We're in the lobby of the main building.
Alan, listen.
Ellie said.
The raptors have gotten loose. They can open doors,
Wu said.
They may be in the same building as you.
They've already gotten to the guard, Grant said. Where are you?
We're in the lodge.
Grant said. And the others? Muldoon? Everybody else?
We've lost a few people trying to get to the maintenance building to get the power going again. Everybody else is in the lodge.
And are the telephones working?
No, the whole system is shut off. Nothing works.
How do we get the system back on?
We've been trying.
We have to get it back on, Grant said. Right away. If we don't, within a half an hour, the raptors will reach the mainland. He spoke rapidly for the next few minutes, telling them about the raptors they had seen on the boat.
Listen,
Henry Wu said.
Can you see to the rear of the visitor building from where you are?
Yes, Grant said.
There's a path straight through the palm trees to the maintenance building. That's where the power equipment and generators are. We can't get past the raptors. You'll have to make it over there. We think most of the raptors are down here by the lodge, but we aren't sure. So be careful. We'll try to keep them busy here.
Okay, Grant said.
You can leave the kids in the cafeteria, and they should be all right. Take the radio with you when you go, and call me when you get to the maintenance building.
Okay. Are we going to the cafeteria, Lex said. Yes, Grant said. Finally.
While Grant made his way to the generators in the maintenance building, Tim and Lex hunted up some food in the cafeteria. They were soon joined by an adult velociraptor, 6 feet tall, powerfully built, with razor-sharp teeth, which moved hungrily about the room sniffing out a kill. Tim was able to lure the creature into a walk-in freezer by leaving a trail of steaks. Grant found the generators. Over the radio, Dr. Wu successfully led Grant through the startup process. Soon the generators were on again. All that remained was for Grant to make it to the control room and restore the systems manually. In the control room, Grant could contact the ship and keep it from docking, but the ship would be reaching shore in only 15 minutes. Dr. Wu was just beginning to explain to Grant how to get to the control room and what to do when he got there, when the radio went out. Grant then met up with Gennaro in the maintenance building. Gennaro had been part of a team that had been surrounded by raptors, and compies too, on their way to fix the power earlier. Grant wasn't worried about the compies. They wouldn't attack anything that moved or looked strong. The raptors were a different story. Back at the lodge, the raptors were trying to leap over the front gates. Only one made it inside, jumping down from the roof on top of Wu, ripping him apart in seconds. Despite the efforts of Ellie and Muldoon to keep the raptors at the front gates by acting as bait, the raptors, exhibiting a surprising intelligence, moved on to the maintenance building, almost as if they knew that Grant was there and the others were depending on him to get the power started so they could bring Jurassic Park under control again. Tim and Lex left the cafeteria and somehow managed to find the control room. There they were in radio contact with Muldoon. With Wu dead and Grant and Gennaro no longer in touch, no one at the lodge knew how to turn on the computers. It was up to Tim to try. In only a few minutes he had the system reset and the monitors began showing views of different areas of the park. There was even a monitor on board the ship. All he had to do was figure out how to call the ship up. But only 8 minutes remained. At that moment, the last thing Tim and Lex wanted to see were the 2 adult raptors that had found their way to the control room. The kids fled, and the raptors followed them into the nursery. There, a baby raptor jumped into Tim's arms. Tim hoped the baby would distract them. He threw the little animal across the room where it landed at the feet of the bigger animals. Before their eyes, the raptors fought over the baby and ate it. Tim found a door and pulled Lex through with him. They were in the DNA extraction laboratory. Luckily, Grant and Gennaro were close behind, but so were the raptors. The raptors seemed surprised by the appearance of more people on the scene. Grant told Gennaro to take the kids to the control room. He had a plan. He edged around the laboratory, leading the raptors away from Gennaro and the kids and into the hatchery.
The raptors, there were 3 of them now, entered the room. Cautiously at first, sniffing the humid air, looking at the long, rocking tables of eggs. The animals moved through the room in a coordinated way, ducking from time to time to peer beneath the tables. They were looking for Grant. He moved to the back of the laboratory, looked up and saw the metal hood marked with a skull and crossbones. A sign said, "Caution, biogenic toxins. Precautions required." Inside the hood were rows of bottles marked with a skull and crossbones. The fluid showed pale green in the ultraviolet light. Nearby, Grant saw a glass dish with syringes in it. The syringes were small, each containing a tiny amount of green, glowing fluid. Grant had devoted his whole life to studying dinosaurs. Now he would see how much he really knew. Velociraptors were small, carnivorous dinosaurs, animals that were long thought to steal eggs. Grant had assumed that velociraptors would always eat eggs if they could, just as certain modern birds ate the eggs of other birds. He crept forward to the nearest egg table and took a large egg from it. The egg was almost the size of a football, cream-colored with faint pink speckling. He held the egg carefully while he stuck the needle through the shell and injected the contents of the syringe. The egg glowed faint blue. Grant bent down and rolled the glowing egg along the floor, toward the raptors. The egg came to rest by the foot of one of them. It rocked gently, clicking against the toe claw of the dinosaur. The raptor looked down in surprise at this new gift, bent over, and sniffed the glowing egg. It rolled the egg with its snout along the floor for a moment and ignored it. It wasn't working. Grant reached for a second egg and injected it with a fresh syringe. He rolled this one fast like a bowling ball. The egg rattled across the floor loudly. One of the animals ducked down, saw it coming, and instinctively chased the moving object, gliding swiftly along the tables to intercept the egg as it rolled. The big jaws snapped down and bit into it, crushing the shell. The raptor stood, yellow albumin dripping from its jaws. It licked its lips noisily and snorted. It bit again and lapped the egg from the floor, but it didn't seem to be in the least distressed. Then the raptor saw him. It was looking right at him. The velociraptor snarled menacingly. It moved toward Grant, crossing the room in long, incredibly swift strides. Grant was shocked to see it happening. He froze in panic when suddenly the animal made a gasping, gurgling sound and the big body pitched forward onto the ground. The heavy tail thumped the floor in spasms. The raptor continued to make choking sounds, punctuated by intermittent loud shrieks. Foam bubbled from its mouth. The head flopped back and forth. The tail slammed and thumped. That's one, Grant thought. The second raptor bent over the falling animal, examining it. It appeared to be puzzled by these death throes. Cautiously it looked at the foaming head, then moved down to the twitching neck, the heaving ribs, the legs, and it took a bite from the hind leg. The dying animal snarled and suddenly lifted its head and twisted, sinking his teeth into the neck of his attacker. That's two, Grant thought. There was still a third raptor left. It did not move for a long time. It just stared. And then it slowly, quietly came forward, stalking him. Grant moved too. He tried to keep as many tables as he could between himself and the advancing animal. Grant crouched down, felt the bulge of the radio in his pocket. He pulled it out and turned it on. "Hello, this is Grant."
Alan?
Ellie's voice.
Alan?
"Listen," he said softly, "just talk. Talk." He pushed the radio across the floor away from him, toward the advancing raptor. He crouched behind a table leg and waited. The tinny voice coming from the radio made the animal pause. It sniffed the air as if sensing someone else in the room.
Alan, it's me. I don't know if you can hear me, Alan. Listen to me, Alan.
The raptor bent over, poked at the radio on the floor. Its body was turned away from Grant. The big tail was right above Grant's head. Grant reached up and jabbed the syringe deep into the flesh of the tail and injected the poison. The raptor reared back and lifted its clawed foot to kick. Grant rolled and the foot slammed down, just missing him. The animal began wheezing. Foam came from its mouth, and then it toppled backward. Gennaro and the kids came into the room. Gennaro helped Grant to his feet. They all turned and ran for the control room. Grant glanced at his watch. It was 10:57. On the video monitor, they could see the boat moving closer to Punta Arenas. It was now only about 200 yards from the dock. Tim worked frantically with the computer, pushing buttons on the keyboard, lifting every receiver in sight, but they heard only dial tones. Finally, Tim saw a phone mounted on the side of the console, a blinking light.
Hello, Control. This is Freddy. Do you read me? Over.
Tim grabbed the receiver. "Hello, this is Tim Murphy. Don't land the boat. Do you hear me?" There was a pause. Then a puzzled voice said,
Sounds like some damn kid.
Tim looked frantically at the others. Gennaro reached for the phone. "If you don't turn that boat around and return to this island immediately," Gennaro said, "you will be found in violation of Section 509 of the Uniform Maritime Act. You will be subject to revocation of license, penalties in excess of $50,000, and 5 years in jail. Do you copy that?" There was a silence. And then distantly, they heard a voice say,
I copy.
and another voice said,
All ahead stern.
The boat began to turn away from the dock. Lex began to cheer. Tim collapsed back in the chair. Grant said, "What's the Uniform Maritime Act?" "Who the hell knows," Gennaro said. They all watched the screen in satisfaction. The boat was definitely headed away from the shore. "I guess the hard part's finished," Gennaro said. Grant shook his head. "The hard part," he said, "is just beginning." 4 hours had passed. The computer was functioning properly now, and they had called authorities in San Jose for help. The Costa Rican National Guard was on its way, as well as an air ambulance to carry Malcolm to a hospital. But over the telephone, the Costa Rican Guard had been distinctly cautious. Undoubtedly, calls would go back and forth between San Jose and Washington before help was finally sent to the island. And now it was growing late in the day. If the helicopters did not arrive soon, they would have to wait until morning. In the meantime, there was nothing to do but wait. The ship was returning. The crew had discovered 3 young raptors scampering about in one of the aft holds and had killed the animals. Tim had gotten quite good with the computer, and he flashed up a new screen. "What the hell's it doing now?" Gennaro said. "Now it says there are fewer animals? 203 instead of 292? Grant nodded. "Jurassic Park is finally coming under control." "Meaning what?" Gennaro asked. "Equilibrium," Grant said. "The fences have been down for hours. The animals are mingling with each other. Populations reaching equilibrium. A true Jurassic equilibrium." "I don't think it was supposed to happen," Gennaro said. "The animals were never supposed to mix." "Well, they are," Grant said. "I was thinking," Muldoon said, "that when the Costa Ricans come, they will probably imagine this island to be a military problem, something to destroy as soon as possible." "Damn right," Gennaro said. "It's my opinion that this island is too dangerous. It must be destroyed. Every animal on this island must be destroyed." Grant suddenly lost his temper and slammed the lawyer up against the concrete wall. "Listen, you little bastard. You have a responsibility to this situation, and you're going to start living up to it. Your island is a mess, Mr. Gennaro. Your experiment is a mess. It has to be cleaned up. But you can't do that unless you know the extent of the mess. And that means finding the nests on the island, especially the raptor nests. They'll be hidden. We have to find them and inspect them and count the eggs. We have to account for every animal born on this island. Then we can burn it down. But first, we have a little work to do."
Grant deduced that the wild raptors were breeding, like frogs, by gender transition. In an environment in which all frogs are female, some frogs begin to spontaneously change sex from female to male. The same must be true for the raptors. They placed a radio collar on the little raptor that Grant had captured in the tunnel, nicknamed Clarence by Lex, and followed it to a massive underground concrete waterworks built on the southern end of Jurassic Park to control flooding. Grant's knowledge of animal nurturing prepared him to accept the idea that captive dinosaurs raised from birth in cages might behave very differently from free-ranging dinosaurs raised in a nest by parents, and that's exactly what he, Ellie, and Gennaro found. The adult raptors freely allowed the humans to observe them in their nest. The adult dinosaurs were benign with the young ones, a little tougher with the juveniles, occasionally snapping at them when their play got too rough. But missing was the savagery that Grant had seen from the raptors raised in captivity on Jurassic Park. At one point, the infants began to squeak and hop about. The adults watched curiously, and then all the raptors ran past the humans racing down the concrete tunnel. Grant, Ellie, and Gennaro hurried after the raptors. The animals burst through a large opening of the tunnel right onto a section of the Pacific Ocean beach. The animals lined up in a strange, rigid, almost military-like fashion to watch a freighter passing by. Grant was struck by the coordination of their behavior. They were moving and acting as a group now.
Grant stared at the velociraptors, ranged formally along the beach, silently watching the boat. An unprovable possibility occurred to him, that the dinosaurs might be truly different animals. They might possess behavior and social life, organized along lines that were utterly mysterious to mammalian observers. Since the dinosaurs were fundamentally birds... "Oh my God," he said, and he suddenly understood what he was looking at. "Those animals," Gennaro said. "They sure are desperate to escape from here." "No," Grant said. "They don't want to escape at all." "They don't?" "No," Grant said. "They want to migrate." "That's fantastic," Ellie said. "Where do you suppose they want to go?" "I don't know," Grant said. And then the big helicopters burst through the fog, their underbellies heavy with armament. The raptors scattered in alarm as one of the helicopters moved in to land on the beach. A door was flung open and soldiers in olive uniforms came running toward them. Grant heard the rapid babble of voices in Spanish and saw that Muldoon was already aboard with Tim and Lex. One of the soldiers said in English, "Please, you will come with us. Please, there is no time here." Grant looked back at the beach where the raptors had been, but they were gone. All the animals had vanished. It was as if they had never existed. The soldiers were tugging at him, and he allowed himself to be led beneath the thumping blades and climbed up through the big door. Muldoon leaned over and shouted in Grant's ear, "They want us out of here now! They're going to do it now!" The soldiers pushed Grant and Ellie and Gennaro into seats and helped them clip on harnesses. Tim and Lex waved to him. The door was left open as the helicopter lifted away from the beach, and Grant leaned out to see if he could catch a last look at the raptors. But then they were above the palm trees, moving north over the island. Grant leaned to Muldoon and shouted, "What about the others?" Muldoon shouted, "They've already taken off Harding and some workmen. Hammond had an accident. Found him on the hill near his bungalow. Must have fallen." "Is he all right?" Grant said. "No. Compy's got him." "What about Malcolm?" Grant said. Muldoon shook his head. "He died before help came." Grant was too tired to feel much of anything. Somewhere behind them they heard explosions. The helicopter gained altitude and then moved east out over the ocean. Grant sat back in his seat. He thought of the dinosaurs standing on the beach, and he wondered where they would migrate if they could, and he realized he would never know. He felt sad and relieved in the same moment. The officer came forward again, bending close to his face. "Are you in charge?" "No," Grant said. "Please, senor, who is in charge?" Nobody.
The Costa Rican government put up the survivors of Isla Nublar in a comfortable hotel in San Jose. The survivors were free to come and go, and to call whomever they wished, but they were not permitted to leave the country. Since many people had died, and since an ecological disaster had been narrowly averted, the government was not disposed to release the survivors in a hurry. Grant was questioned again and again by the government officials. One day he was visited by a man who introduced himself as Marty Gutierrez.
"The authorities won't tell you," Gutierrez said, "because they are afraid and perhaps also resentful of you. But something very peculiar is happening in the rural regions." "Babies being bitten?" "No, thankfully that has stopped. But something else. In the East Maloya section, which is to the north, some unknown animals ate the crops in a very peculiar manner. They moved each day in a straight line from the coast into the mountains, into the jungle, like a migration." "What crops?" Grant said, sitting upright. "Well, it was odd. They would only eat agama, beans, and soy, and sometimes chickens. Presumably these animals entered the jungles. In any case, they have not been found yet. And we are being kept here because..." Gutierrez shrugged. "The government is worried. Perhaps there are more animals, more trouble. They are feeling cautious." "Do you think there are more animals?" "I can't say," Grant said. "Possibly, yes." "I agree," Gutierrez said. "Enjoy your stay with us, Dr. Grant. It is a lovely country here." Grant said, "You're telling me we're not going anywhere." "None of us is going anywhere, Dr. Grant," Gutierrez said, smiling.